the verification, the parties are agreed that it is quite prudent that there has to be a verification of those names.
And what does all that mean in relation to the sittings?
Well, Justice, is quite a difficult question that the parties will then have to grapple with it as to how is the process then taken forward. It is quite important that that matter has to be resolved. We are not against names being included on the list that have been agreed upon. But what is of importance is that those names requires to be verified. I should hasten to mention...
How many names are they? Is that known? Are the parties agreed on that?
I'm making reference to the list of names of 12, the list of 12 that has been made mention of. That is the list that we have agreed that it requires verification.
Advocate Steyn, I know.
Sorry, Justice, Ms. Steyn and I have discussed it, and I'll be addressing just this point before Ms. Steyn continues with her cross-examination. It is correct that we have accepted the proposal that the verification exercise be undertaken by the Ombud. We had accepted that verification is necessary on 7 December. So it's not a new agreement as far as verification goes. When the names were sent on 7 December, it was for the purposes of verification. All we've agreed upon is that the verification exercise needs to take place. We have not been able to have agreement on by when that exercise will be completed. As my learned friend has said, he's unable to give a commitment as to time frame. A possible solution.
Did he say why not?
No.
Possible solution?
A possible solution, and I'm only proposing this in order to try to break the impasse. It's my client's position that they expected the verification exercise to have been done by now, but that once the verification exercise is completed and we have the names, a final list of names, that there's an agreement that those names will be automatically included in the award of the arbitrator. Of course, that would mean that we should get, I must stress, Justice, I'm reaching for a solution to try to get us past it. I'm not making it with any vigor.
Parties can always agree evidence and hand it to the arbitrator by agreement. But I'm not going to have another sitting of oral evidence.
No. My proposal is that the solution would be to avoid oral evidence. So if the parties agree then on the final list of names, which would then be presented to the arbitrator for the basis of including them in the award, there would be no need for another sitting to hear evidence.
Yes, thank you. Advocate Krause?
Justice, I have nothing to add to this debate. Maybe I should just at this stage interject, because I'm very scared that it will be a long night still. We have 2 or 3 outstanding affidavits ourselves, which we would want to file before argument. If I could just raise it at this very late stage.
But you also should provide a final list, isn't it?
Yes, with our argument, if we may.
Of claimants.
Yes, absolutely, Justice.
And you say, when would you do that?
We were hoping to do it today, Justice. That didn't materialize, but we will do so before we present argument.
And if it is disputed, if the list is disputed? I'm certainly not having another Viva voucher hearing.
Yes.
We have to bring it to a close sometime, and the parties were amazingly dilatory. If they've been having exchanges from December, I know no reason why. We have no closure on a matter of such significance.
Yes.
I'm certainly not extending the hearing, and we need to have, you have to talk to your colleagues and find an agreement about the identity of the claimants amongst the survivor claimants, and that should be by agreement between the parties. The less consideration of justice, where you could apply for reopening of oral hearing, but you'll have to say why you didn't do it all these many, many weeks.
Justice, we're not, we're not intending to do that at all at this stage. We realize that there's a cut-off date, and we need to finish by the cut-off date.
Ruketina?
Thank you, Justice. We have no objection if the list is handed in by agreement between the parties.
Yes. Advocate Groenewald?
Thank you, Justice. We support a suggestion by my colleague from Section 27 and the proposed procedure in dealing with this issue.
Advocate Dutama?
Justice, it is
why can't we get a cut-off date? Why must we deal with an open-ended investigation in arbitration that requires finality? It's never in the interest of justice to have open-ended arrangements. There must be a date. And if you seek extension, you'll have to approach me in chambers or otherwise for an extension. But we can't have an open-ended arrangement that one day you might find complete the verification. How long should it take?
Well, it is indeed correct, Justice. I wish I can be able to give certainty on when the outcome of the verification. I must just indicate that we have made contact with the Office of the Ombudsman, and it is clearly outside our hands to be able to give a commitment. That is a matter that we can try and canvass with the Office of the Ombudsman and express the need for speed verification.
Well, you know how the law of evidence works. If the applicants provide me with a list and show and demonstrate that they are deceased under oath and affidavit, I'll be obliged to accept that without referral back to the state. And there's no way we could have argument without closing evidence. So common sense should suggest that that process must be done by the time argument is heard.
Justice, we have been on this route before about the list being introduced and being subjected to verification. And I should indicate that at one instance, the list which was provided could not meet the criteria for that list to be added to what we have. So
That may be interesting, Council, historically. I want to know within what time. I would like that verification. If the state is concerned about its accuracy, it must happen before argument. You can't have legal argument without standing evidence. So whatever your instructions are, it has to be before we hear argument.
I do get the concern from you, Justice, about the time frame. But all that I want to submit is that that commitment can only be made by the office of the Ombud. We are not in a position to give a firm date of when the verification will be completed. We have gathered the information necessary to assist that process. And once we have done that, we can only rely on the office of the Ombud to come to our assistance.
Very well. Let me make my position quite clear. If by the time argument starts and I don't have the verification, I will accept the uncontroverted evidence of the applicants, of the claimants, as uncontroverted evidence before me, placed on affidavit. So you have that option. Either the state hurries up and does it in time, or this matter will proceed without the state verification.
Well, I must say that the position that Justice is taking, it gives the impression that the department is not willing to get this issue resolved.
No, I think you should be careful what you say now.
Yes.
I'm requiring a time frame from you, and I'm telling you which time frame might work.
Yes.
I'm not talking about the department. I'm talking about anybody being willing. You must get instructions. You were asked in December, and I would like to close this hearing. It can't go on forever. At the point of argument, that verification, if the state is interested in it, must be before me. If it is not, I'll proceed the way the law permits. It has nothing to do with any impressions about the department. Anyway, are there any further submissions?
Well, the point which I wanted to make is that the time period is not within the power of the department. Thank you.
Very well. Can we, yes.
Sorry, Justice. It looks like Professor Makgoba would like to offer some assistance in respect of the list and the deadline. We would like to address you.
Well, the problem is that Professor Makgoba has to get into the witness box and be sworn in. He can't speak from the bar.
Thank you.
So if he's going to be the next witness after this, so be it. But he can't speak from the bar, can he? So we need to have the cross-examination done, and if you want to call Professor Makgoba, then that may be done. Ms. Steyn.
Thank you, Justice. And MEC, can I just thank you for your patience while this issue has been discussed and resolved. I only have 3 more issues that I'd like to canvass with you. The first one being to pick up on an issue that you raised during your examination in chief regarding the payment of compensation to the claimants in this case. You testified during your evidence in chief that you're not dealing with this matter as the Department of Health alone. You're dealing with it as the provincial government. Is that correct?
Indeed, to the best of my knowledge, the parties representing the state are the Ministry of Health, the Gauteng provincial government, in that order, and I'm part of the Gauteng provincial government.
MEC, if you could please, and if someone could assist you, turn to ELA 113 in the exhibits before you. Are you there?
Yes, I am.
This is the budget speech that was delivered by the MEC for Finance, Ms. Barbara Creasy, on the 7th of March, 2017. Do you see that?
Yes.
I'm going to read to you, MEC, an extract from page 20 of that speech. And I'm reading from the last paragraph under the heading, Restoring Public Confidence in Our Public Health System. It's just before the next heading of Fighting Poverty and Promoting Social Cohesion. It says, when the alternative dispute resolution process is complete, we will appropriate any necessary resources for the families of the victims of the Life Esidimeni tragedy from the Provincial Revenue Fund. Do you see that?
Yes, I did, Councillor.
And so can you confirm for us, MEC, that the resources, that Gauteng Department of Health will not be paying compensation in terms of the arbitration award from its own resources?
Through you, Justice, I have no authority over appropriation of funds. That is the authority of the MEC for Finance. And as such, I am not able to respond directly to your question respectfully.
But you do confirm, MEC, that this case is not the Gauteng Department of Health alone?
I have indicated that even before I joined the Department of Health, as MEC for Health, on behalf of the Gauteng government, the Premier had accepted the recommendation of the Health Ombuds, and that indeed, as the Gauteng provincial government, we are part of this arbitration process, and therefore, with the respective officers will then deal with the matter according to the authorities they have, legal authority they have.
I'd like to turn now, MEC, to the question of the budget of the Gauteng Department of Health.
Yes.
And you testified earlier that the marathon project was indeed costly to the department. You referred to a bloated staff establishment.
Yes.
You said there were warm bodies employed by the department, but that their posts were not funded, that had to come out of the goods and services budget. Can you tell us, MEC, what the total cost was of the marathon project?
I'm not currently able to indicate the total amount, and we can be able to provide that later. But what I can indicate are the areas where there has been additional costs that were not previously budgeted for. How government works is that there is a medium-term expenditure framework of a budgeting, and out of that, the variations are also accommodated, whether mid-year as part of the budget or the following year. But in terms of this project specifically, the additional costs were around the staff, around the relocation, and I must also indicate that National Department of Health did raise some of the funds to support the relocation over and above the costs by the Gauteng Department of Health, and that the reopening of the Selby and Life Esidimeni also was at an additional cost, and there were also costs incurred at the Cullinan Rehab Center and various hospitals in preparation for the Gauteng Marathon project. So there has been quite a substantive funds incurred additionally to the MTF period for the budget.
If you could, MEC, provide us with the breakdown of what that cost was as you've undertaken, And in doing so, if you could also provide us with a comparison between those expenses, those costs, and the costs that the Gauteng Department of Health would have incurred had the mental health care users not been discharged from Life Esidimeni.
Yes, I must apologize. My understanding was that MEC for Finance was going to deal with that. I will confer with her so that that is presented.
Thank you,
And to
MEC.
which end would that be, Council?
Justice, we've heard a lot of evidence during this arbitration about the cost saving and that it wasn't about cost saving. This is almost the other side of the coin.
Well, we know now. It has been conceded by the state. At least this of 3 witnesses now have said it was not about costs. It was not about savings. When we know what the savings are, we know. It just shows that the decision was irrational. But that's what all the witnesses of the state have described it as. So I'm not certain whether we should burden the records beyond this, Ms. Steyn. This is a prima facie view, unless you persuade me otherwise.
Justice, we are, of course, in your hands. This goes, in my submission, one step beyond that it wasn't a cost-saving exercise, that in addition to not effectively saving costs, there were, in fact, significant costs incurred by the Department of Health as confirmed by the MEC.
Yes. I think I would like to see resources being spent to verify the names of the deceased, rather than going to do financial spreadsheets, something that now is common cause, probably after the last 3 witnesses.
We accept that. Thank you, Justice.
Okay, thank you.
MEC, if you could please now turn to ELA 159 in the exhibits file before you.
I have Council.
Okay. MEC, this is a document comprised of extracts from annual reports dealing with the Gauteng Department of Health's budget and specifically the mental health budget. And page 15, for your convenience, is a table that summarizes the mental health budget and the total Department of Health budget from the financial year 2012-2013 up to financial year 2016-2017. Do you see that?
On page 13.
Page 15.
Oh, okay, page 15. My apology. Yes.
The first heading deals with the total budget of the Gauteng Department of Health. The second deals with provincial hospital services, and so that's psychiatric and mental hospitals. The third is chronic psychiatric care, and that's Life Esidimeni. The fourth is community-based services, and those are the mental health NPOs. And the fifth heading on that table is the total of Life Esidimeni plus mental health NPOs. Are you with me?
I'm actually trying to be with you.
It's on page 15.
My apology. I've got. This is 13. This must be. 14.
It's the last page of that exhibit.
Must be 15.
The heading is
Okay.
Audited Outcomes.
Statement of transfers to non-profit institutions. Is that it? This is the last one I have here.
No. The pages, there should be page numbers in the top right corner of that document. Perhaps somebody could help
The document is
you.
LR 159 at the top right, and would have the number LR 159,
Yes.
and it is numbered from 1 to 15.
Yes.
On the last page,
Page 15.
audited outcomes.
Oh, okay. That's fine. I found it.
Thank
Page
you.
15. Yes. Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
And do you see the headings in the table, MEC,
Yes, I
of
do.
the different
Yes, I do.
sub-programs? The last, as we said, is the total of life Esidimeni plus the mental health NPOs. If we look at that, do you agree with me that there has been a significant decrease in the mental health budget allocated to life Esidimeni and NGOs since 2012 and 2013?
Indeed.
And if we look then at psychiatric hospitals, which is the second heading, we see that overall there is still a decrease since 2012-2013 in the mental health budget.
Is that for the provincial hospital services?
That's correct.
Psychiatric and mental hospital, yes. What I have here is an increase from 957 for 2012-13. It was it has increased to 2016-17 by about 1.9%. Am I correct? Yes.
Perhaps I can frame my question this way, MEC. We see under the provincial hospital services
Yes.
an increase from 956 million
Yes.
to 1 billion, approximately 1 billion.
Yes.
If we look at Life Esidimeni plus NGOs,
Yes.
we see a decrease
Yes.
from 552 million
Yes.
to 216 million.
Indeed.
And so my proposition to you is that the combination of the budget for the hospital services, for Life Esidimeni, and the NGOs, if we look at all of those together, overall, there is a decrease in the mental health budget.
That is adding all the line items on the last column in 2016 from top to bottom. Is that what you mean?
Justice, that is looking at the difference between 2012, 2013, and 2016, 2017, which on my calculation is about a 50 billion rand increase in respect of the 50 million rand increase in respect of the psychiatric hospitals, and a decrease.
I don't want to be bogged down in detail. Would you put your proposition to the witness, and then we can get to detail to demonstrate the proposition? What do you seek from the MEC? We have had MEC finance already, and I don't want another MEC to deal with the figures again unduly. So what is the proposition?
My proposition, Justice, is that we've seen in the Gauteng Department of Health budget a decrease in the resources available to mental health between 2012-2013 and 2016-2017.
Overall, it does come across as a decrease. What I'm just trying to find out is that first row of 27 million rands. Actually, that's a total 27 billion rands, the total budget for the Gauteng Department of Health. It's 27 billion from 2012-13 to 37 for 16-17. That's a total departmental budget.
That's correct.
And then underneath, if you take the 1.9% nominal increase and the decrease in the sub-programs of mental health, indeed, overall, there is a decrease.
Yeah, that is true of mental health care, but it's not true of the total health budget. Because the total health budget,
Has
we can
increased.
see, increases, Dr. Ramokgopa,
Yes, by
8.5%.
Yes.
So the proposition is on mental health care in particular, on the numbers, there's less allocated to mental health care. Is that it?
The proposition, Justice, is that there is the proportion of the total Gauteng Department of Health budget that is allocated to mental health has decreased in the years included in this table.
Yes, it actually looks like. But if we consider that for 2017-18, this current financial year, we had to reverse the closure of Life Esidimeni as well as of Selby. There would be an increase, and most definitely that. But I agree with you that from the figures presented between 2012, 13, and 2016 financial years, there has been a decrease, yes, from the figures presented.
Yeah. In effect, the answer is if you go through to March of this year and look at audited outcomes,
Yes.
you're going to find more money because of the reversals. In other words, reopening Selby and Life Esidimeni and all these costs, including costs of these proceedings.
That's correct,
That
Justice.
number will probably be quite high.
MEC,
I must, through you, Justice, my apology. I must indicate that since I've had to deal with the finances of the Department of Health, I really find it difficult to deal with figures before me without factoring in accruals. Because I'll just give an example. Even in the last financial year, there is a reported underspending of about 200 million for infrastructure. But if you look at the overall budget, and with the accruals of 6.7 billion, you can see that it is not possible to underspend because you really do not have money. So there could be a budget, but you find that there's no cash. And that is the cash modified accounting system that government uses. And it's not only for this purpose that I become a bit anxious, but all purposes and under all circumstances when I deal with the finances of the department, I would like to also factor in the accruals to get a correct picture.
Advocate Steyn?
thank you,
You can
Justice.
sense my impatience
I
already.
can indeed, and so I'm
Yes,
going to move
indeed.
on to the last issue. MEC, now I'd just like to talk about how we move forward from this arbitration. We've heard a lot of evidence about failures across the health system in Gauteng. We've heard a lot of evidence about officials following unlawful instructions, ignoring procedures, ignoring the regulations that bind them. We've heard about professionals who are acting in contravention of their oaths. We also know that the problem's extended outside the Department of Health to mortuaries, to NGOs. It's really been a very deep and widespread issue. And so my question to you is this: given the deep-rooted failures that we've seen in this arbitration, what is the Department of Health going to do to address these systemic failures and make sure that we don't sit here once more in the future when another tragedy occurs?
I think that's a very important issue to deal with. The commitment that I have made to the Premier and also to the public is that we'll spare no effort to ensure that we identify risks and we deal with them decisively to ensure that we don't have a recurrence. First and foremost, I acknowledge that the Health Ombuds recommendations are a significant contribution towards that, and that is why we are focused on implementing the recommendations, including one of the recommendations is on the health information system. I can report that we worked round the clock. Last year, December, we presented to the Executive Council an e-health strategy that will enable us to have a reliable information system. We have already begun around the mental health program to have an electronic database. That would be essential. Secondly, which is very critical, what I found was the department, especially at head office, was dysfunctional. There was no team effort, there were no systems of decision making, and we have established an executive management committee system. It took a bit of time, but it is taking root, and it is also part and parcel of the deliverology agreement between myself and the Premier to enforce a systematic process of decision making that the institution can be held accountable for. The third important issue is to ensure that we respect and comply with policies and regulations that are there. What I found, for instance, was that head office would have knowledge of regulations, but those would not necessarily be aware. The institution's facilities would not be aware of them. But in addition to that, I've engaged with the South African Institute of Chartered Accountants, which was mainly responsible for helping the department to get a clean audit, that they must also focus on systems, especially financial management systems and accountability. We've worked very hard around the clock, and that is why we were able, with their assistance, to improve, for instance, payment of service providers from as low as about 15% to about 30%. So we are seeing progress in putting systems in place and ensuring that there is accountability. Finally, without going through all the steps that we have taken.
As you go finally, MEC, just remember your minister is waiting.
Yes.
So we should help him sometime today still.
Yes.
Yep.
Alternatively, we can submit a recovery plan. But in addition to that, we've got a team of experts jointly appointed by the Minister, the Premier, and myself to manage particularly head office. We've had resignations of no less than 5 senior managers as we speak. So the intervention team is assisting during this process over the next 6 months until we have final appointments.
MEC, we appreciate your offer of the recovery plan and look forward to receiving that from you. I'd like to thank you once more for taking the time to testify today. There are no further questions from me.
Thank you.
Thank you, Advocate Steyn. Advocate Krause.
Thank you, Justice Museneke. MEC, my name is Lila Krause. I appear together with my learned friend Ms. Kibi for the survivors of this program. I am going to ask you a few questions. It might seem disjointed because most of the stuff has been dealt with. So I might move from one subject to another. Can I start off by just saying, you said that you referred some of the officials to their professional bodies.
Exactly.
Yes.
Thank you.
Can I ask you, when did you do that?
I've referred the case of all to the Nursing Council jointly after the finalization of or the resignation of Mrs. Dr. Manamela. So that
this is
should
recently?
Yes.
Yes. And the other officials?
All of them, I've referred them simultaneously.
Could I ask, why did it take so long to do?
Council, as I indicated, this has been quite a ruckus process of to and fro in terms of who said what, who didn't what, who didn't do what. We've just concluded actually the full record of the disciplinary hearing. We got the documents piecemeal, and we were told that the transcribing is not complete. And so those were the delays that we experienced. And I appreciate that indeed it has taken long, but we were determined. I was determined to ensure that there is a review and that they
My question is just when?
Yes.
Thank you. Could I just move on to the next issue, and that is of the missing mental health care users?
Yes.
There was a document handed to you, and I'm not sure whether you were really, you referred to it now in your evidence.
Yes.
We have a client who's still missing, or family of a client that's still missing, and his name is Guy Daniel Kanza. I'm going to spell that for you. Kanza. He's not part of that list. So if I could ask that you look into his particulars as well. He was at Waverley and he was bipolar.
We will certainly deal with, follow that up together with the police. It's a matter that we are working with the South African Police Services on.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
And then if I could just ask you, already on day 34, the Honourable Justice asked for a list of staff that was absorbed into the department. That hasn't come forward yet. Do you know whether there's such a list?
Yeah.
That would be
I will
staff
look
of,
Life Esidimeni.
yes.
Yeah. I am aware of that list. I would not know why it hasn't been submitted as yet.
So it is available.
Yes, it
could
is
I ask
available.
that you submit that to us as soon as possible, please?
Okay.
Then, if I could also then move on, you said that there was a 3-year contract in place for Life Esidimeni. Our clients are concerned about their mental health care users. They're concerned that they will have to go through this again. Can you give them any assurance that this wouldn't happen again, this carnage of people?
The Gauteng Mental Health Marathon Project, it can happen again.
You see,
It certainly cannot happen again.
but there's only a 3-year contract in place now. And there's, as far as we can see, there's no building of community services, and there's definitely not place in hospitals. So what undertaking or assurance can you give to the families?
As I've indicated, even this process of the Gauteng Mental Health Marathon Project does not even fit within what you can indicate as deinstitutionalization within the context of the laws and the policies we have. It cannot happen again.
So we all agree with you
Yes.
then. But
The government planning is on a 3-year cycle, MTF. And that is also how the relationship with various service providers has been. And that is part and parcel of compliance, amongst others, with the PFMA, so that there is transparency in the processes that are underway.
could I also then ask you, part of the Ombuds recommendation was disciplinary hearings against your officials, but also that they would receive counselling. Now, we have not received any evidence that there were counselling, and I'm not meaning counselling to make them feel better, counselling to how to deal with situations like this. Will that still happen?
I'm aware that counseling has begun in terms of the mental health
Review board, you said that, yes.
professionals.
Oh.
No, the professionals that are in the department, in the mental health directorate. The counseling has begun already.
And that will include ethical duties, hopefully.
Ethical counseling is, the program is for all management and health workers in general. There is a strategy and a program that is underway, but most definitely it includes mental health directorate.
Thank you, MEC. And then if I could just ask you, we had evidence of a young man that went after Life Esidimeni. His His name is Sibusiso Ngwenya. He went to Tembisa. His father found him naked in a bed, tied to a bed. He was, there were human feces in the ward. There was a corpse lying next to him. So going forward, it seems to me the problems are a little bit bigger than only mental health institutions. And are you looking at that?
I must confirm that the Office of Health Standards Compliance does not only include the Health Ombud. It also has the office that deals with the standards, that assesses compliance, and also an inspectorate. And it is our plan to ensure that we reinstitute a Gauteng-based similar system. We're in discussion with the National Department to look at whether it's an extension of the Office of Standards Compliance, the Gauteng chapter, or the Department of Health institutes such. By the time I left, there was an accreditation committee which was independent and which was also reporting to the legislature in 2006 to ensure that the patient safety, patient care and quality are not compromised.
You see, a mental care health user is a very vulnerable person. You
Indeed.
can't have him lie in a hospital bound to a bed without a mattress next to a corpse. That just flies in the face of any normal situation, but more so if it's a mental care health
That
user.
case has to be reported to the Mental Health Review Board. It must be investigated, and action needs to be taken against any official that subjected the mental health care user to that circumstance.
Thank you.
And that is why we have mental health review boards in all our districts.
Then just lastly, one issue that I want to raise with you, this is the last issue that I want to raise with you, and that is, what systems do you have in place to make sure that you are aware of court cases, especially court cases about human rights being in courts, that you personally will be aware of them?
I must indicate that there was no reliable system, and that is one of the priority areas that I've focused on. And we now do have a protocol of managing legal cases that come to the office from the time that there's a notice and throughout the cycle. So that is a priority, and we've just completed the process of an electronic database of our legal department and cases.
Let me see, one of the things
It was a problem.
one of the things that's bothering me very much, and I can perhaps hand in the LR now, is maybe I should just do that. Could the court just give me a moment?
Oh, yes.
Justice, this is a very thick document, so we have distributed electronically to the parties, but we have a copy for the witness and for justice. If I could just... this is a court case. If I could just have the next LR number. Do you know the last LR number? I hear this was 166, 169, 169. We have consensus, Justice. The LR number is 169.
169.
MEC, this is a court case that was made by Siabeding.
Justice, sorry for the interruption. I've just conferred with my learned colleague on my right to find out if he does have the document. He's in the same position as us. We don't have the document.
Justice, I will leave the document for the time being until my learned friends can have that.
Now that I know what document it is, Justice, I have the document.
I'll just make the point and move on,
Yes.
Justice. In this matter, there was asked that a curator be appointed. And you will see there are some flags, red flags there. That's the two affidavits by a woman, Sandra de Villiers, and she begged the court in founding and in replying that a curator be appointed because she was fearing that her brother would die. And you would see that she's made the last affidavit, it's the second last red flag, on the 2nd of August. Her brother died on the 3rd of October. And the courts didn't appoint a curator ad litem because the department took, in my opinion, an absurd technical point, and the curator was not appointed. So what I want to say, to put to you, this is Jaco Skols that died justice. What I want to put to you, what are you going to put in place to follow the court's instructions that with human rights abuses, the state shouldn't take technical points?
Council, can I respectfully reiterate that the legal unit was one of the most dysfunctional units.
Dysfunctional.
Dysfunctional. With the following cases, record keeping, and we prioritized it. The head of legal resigned some few months ago. We've made an appointment of a new head as swiftly as we could, and we're working with, even with the Office of the Premier, the Office of the DG, to finalize the electronic management of records. So I acknowledge that indeed there were problems, and I'm putting on record that we have made interventions to avoid such occurrences.
That human rights abuses will be taken seriously by your department.
Human rights.
It wouldn't be about winning in court. It will be about winning for the people that you serve.
The Department of Health itself is about the rights of the most vulnerable in society, constitutional rights, basic human rights. The Bill of Rights gives or assures, guarantees South Africans progressive realization of that right. So the Department of Health cannot be on the other side of protecting anyone against human rights abuses.
Thank you, MEC. I wish you well in getting the department up to speed and doing the right things.
Yes.
Thank you, Justice.
Thank you. Advocate Hina?
Thank you, Justice. We have no questions for MEC.
Advocate Groenewald?
Thank you, Justice. Just two issues.
Yes.
MEC, my name's Dirk Groenewald. I'm here on behalf of 4 of the family members who've lost a family member. So I'd just like to find out the instruction that the final written warnings be reviewed. When was that instruction given?
I received a report sometime in August, and the instructions were given first week of September.
First week of September.
Yes.
We had Mrs. Jacobus here just the other day, and she said, well, nothing have happened. They haven't received any documents indicating that their final written warnings was going to be reviewed. Do you know anything about it?
Yes, it is possible, as I've indicated, that the process of getting transcripts and all that took excessively long. But I can assure you that the process has advanced, and the team is working on it. We have received counsel, at least one senior counsel feedback that there is no prospect possibly of winning the case of review.
And can I tell you why, ma'am?
We have also consulted further in this regard, because it is really my belief that justice will not be fully done, especially in terms of the sanctions given, compared to the wrong done.
Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, do you know that the department asked for the sanction of a final written warning, that the final written warning be imposed?
In my investigations of why there has not been progress in this regard, and why I even phoned senior counsel myself to get an understanding, I was made aware by the, and he has put that in writing, by the attorneys that were representing the state, that their intention was to call for a harsher sentence, and they were phoned and instructed by some officials in the Labor Relations Division to enter into a plea bargain and bargain for a final written warning.
So do you want to tell us that the department gave instructions that there be negotiations, that only a final written warning, a sanction of a final written warning be imposed?
That is what I have found, and I've referred that to the accounting officer to take the necessary steps to deal with that matter. But I must also put on record that the officials that are still remaining in the department point a finger to the Director Labor Relations, who has since resigned.
So you think, you can't confirm, but you think it was the Director Labor Relations who gave the instruction?
No, the officials that were asked, and they have under oath made affidavits that they were instructed, they were so instructed. We have taken steps in this regard, and I've instructed the accounting officer to ensure that, because he was not, he says he was not consulted, that he should take necessary disciplinary steps against the officials involved.
Just one last thing, ma'am. I think tomorrow marks the anniversary of the Ombuds report. It's a year since the release of the report.
Yes.
You will,
Interesting observation.
thank you very much,
You are
Justice.
spot on, Counsel.
Thank you, Justice. But you will agree with me, ma'am, that there's still a lot of work to be done. We have missing patients. There's still some action that needs to be taken against some officials. So there's still a lot of work to be done.
My approach, Counsel, is that a lot has been done, and especially together with the families. We have traveled a long way with your inputs as well, supporting the families in whatever way that you can. And yes, the process is not concluded, but a lot has been done. We have de-risked the surviving patients from risky situations into safer places. We have strengthened the systems, including the licensing conditions and specifications. We have also put systems in the department to ensure greater accountability. We have strengthened community-based mental health services to ensure that there is no vertical programs that does not involve the district services. So a lot has been done, but yes, indeed, a lot more still needs to be done by all of us.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Final question, ma'am. Would you say that you have learned what not to do from your predecessor?
Yes.
Can you highlight just a few of those things?
First and foremost, democracy and even our constitution indicates that this is a participatory democracy, that those of us that are in government are not self-serving. We are serving the public, and we must strive for the public to own their health systems and state institutions and to hold us accountable. The second issue is that professionals must have a high ethical grounding, and they must be able and be prepared to defend their professions. The ethical standards, they must be there at all times, because we hire professionals because they are so accredited and they are so respected for the codes and the ethical codes that they subscribe to. And thirdly, to ensure that there are systems. It is really my opinion that sometimes systems are broken down for ulterior motives, because I can state that the Department of Health had systems in place. But when I came in, there was really very little of systems to show for. So it means that our audit oversight processes must be much more rigorous so that we institutionalize the progress we make and that sensitive departments like Department of Health never regress. We are looking at legislation in that regard. And just finally, to indicate that we need to empower especially staff, employees, to utilize the whistleblowing processes that are there to ensure that we mitigate the risks that we see. Because many of the officials, they say they saw danger coming, but they felt paralyzed. They didn't take it further to ensure that this danger that they foresaw does not happen. So there are indeed a lot of lessons, and I've also proposed that we need to work with especially health systems schools to make this a scholarly study so that we record it in history to ensure that it never happens again. The lessons must be recorded. But lessons can't only come from me. It must come from us as a collective so that we as a society were able to defend institutions such as the health system.
Thank you very much, MEC. Thank you very much, Justice.
Well, you invited a lecture and you got it.
Indeed so, Justice.
That is, might say, on my part, quite immaculate. Re-examination, Council.
Justice, there are no questions in re-examination. Thank you, Dr. Ramokgopa.
Thank you. MEC, I have a disclosure to make, and that is that you come from that great village called Attridgeville in Pretoria, and that you and me were born in exactly the same village. And in case somebody talks about it later, yes, I have a duty to let them know, and I say that with a lot of pride. I know the amount of work you did together with Dr. Kinoshi to get us to where we are, and your role in negotiating with the families to establish this ADR process, its content, as well as decisions around whether or not the state would fight the merits of the case and so on. So you have been quite a very important person, at least in the process I'm aware of, leading to this arbitration. And to that extent, you have been a big part of the healing that might occur, and I'd like to thank you for that role. We have developed a practice to allow you to have your final word, and you may do so.
Justice, my final word is that this has really been a very painful experience for the families. I cannot take out of my mind the experience of the 18th of February 2017, the healing session, and I must thank the families for trusting us to be part of their healing session that they convened. But that session made me realize that indeed there is deep, deep pain. There is also, and there must be, deep shame for all of us as a Department of Health, as a society, to have had this tragedy in our lifetime in this land that is respected for a constitutional dispensation that protects human rights. We let down the most vulnerable in society when we needed to be there for them. I just want to reiterate personally my deepest regret and apology that even though I was not in the Department of Health, yes, indeed, we did see the TV coverages, we did read about the protest, but we never anticipated, we never appreciated the depth of the desperation. And for me, it touches me even most because as a deputy minister, I was responsible for, amongst others, mental health services. And the WHO did commend South Africa for having convened what is now known as the Ekurhuleni Summit with Ekurhuleni Declaration. But also our country, even before the National Health Act was promulgated, the Mental Health Act was promulgated to show that we put a high premium on the rights of the most vulnerable. We as a society that I'm part of, we were not vigilant enough to be able to join in those that were trying to avert this tragedy. I just want to also say on behalf of the Department of Health, I want to extend my deepest apology, and we have taken the various management as well as middle management and ordinary workers to understand fully what happened. Many of them were not aware. They understand, and many have signed the declaration that extends apology on behalf of the Department of Health to the families of the bereaved and also to the survivors and their families, as well as to the public. Please accept our most sincere apologies, and we want to commit to work with the family committee to redress what we still can redress, but to institutionalize accountability, to institutionalize ownership by society. We have agreed with the Provincial Health Forum and the Family Committee that for assisted and involuntary care facilities, we must establish family committees. That is also one thing, Council, that we still need to do to ensure that indeed this never happens again. So we really apologize. It's actually unbelievable, but it happened. And if this process, our contribution to this process can help the healing process and also closure, although it won't be overnight, we are available to support, and that's why we are here.
Dr. Gwen Ramokgopa, ra go leboga sesi.
Re a leboga.
Go leboga gantši-ntši fela.
Justice. Thank you.
I've said a thank you in one of our official languages, Advocate Grunewald. There are 11 of them. We are done. Again, thank you ever so much. And as I said earlier, I'm very proud that you and me come from the same village, and Dr. Kinoshi. And you are being called in to clean up. So that leaves us, I can't resist saying with great pride, to come from that little village called Attridgeville and to be so committed to try and help our country. We are done with you, Doctor, for now, and we thank you again. I'm going to take the adjournment so that we get the minister to come in, subject to some violent objection. We have to go on and finish, because that's all time we have. So I'm going to take a 10-minute adjournment so that we can get the minister in. Advocate Witamo, are you ready to go on? I saw you shifting in your chair.
Justice, the minister has been waiting and he is available. As you said, unless if there is a violent objection to us proceeding, he will be able to take the stand.
Yes, no, thank you. Once more, we are adjourned for 15 minutes.
maybe somewhere here, and then bounce it off.
Yeah, I'll advise you to bounce it maybe from here, ne?
This side.
Yeah, because
Wait.
from this side, because the attorneys always give issues that they can't see the person and
Okay, let's bounce it off this side.
yeah.
What can we plug it there? Can you take out that cell phone?
Okay. Unless there's only one plug here.
Can you no. You choose my little one up there. Yeah, I can see. So, we'll come over and say
Thank you. Please be seated. Ministerial Tamisha. Ralamogela, in which Advocate Utama, you're going to proceed with the minister now, are you?
Indeed, Justice.
Yes. In which language do you want to testify, Minister?
In English.
In English. Would you put your full names on record?
Aaron Motsoaledi.
Do you swear that the evidence you're about to give will be the truth and nothing but the truth? And if so, please raise your right hand and say, "So help me God."
So help me God.
Thank you. Counsel.
Good afternoon, Minister.
Good afternoon, Counsel.
Thank you for making time to be before these proceedings. I should put it on record that in terms of the terms of reference which regulate these proceedings, you have been called to come and give an apology to the affected families who went through the tragic events of their loved ones having to die pursuant to the Marathon project. We will not be limiting you on that aspect. We just want you to assist the families of how you have come to know of the Marathon project and what is your relationship as the National Minister of Health in relation to the Provincial Department of Health. For the record, can you just indicate from which period were you appointed to the position of Minister of Health?
Thank you, Counsel. I was appointed as a Minister of Health from May 2009. I'm not exactly confident about the month, but it was after the 2009 elections.
As it is well known that these proceedings are as a result of the recommendations of the Health Ombudsman, who had investigated the circumstances relating to the death of mental health care users. It is quite clear that at the time of this investigation, you were and you are still the Minister of Health. Just to assist these proceedings, can you just take us through your relationship with the Provincial Department of Health as to how do you get to interact?
Yes, thank you, Counsel. My relationship with Provincial Department of Health is firstly guided by the Constitution, which states that health is a concurrent competence. This is important to understand because there are other departments which don't have any concurrence, like departments of Home Affairs, Science and Technology, Defense. They all have ministers who act on their own. But in health, there is supposed to be a concurrent competency in the Constitution, meaning that the powers are exercised both nationally and provincially. To that extent, the National Health Act 2003 states that the role and responsibility of the National Department of Health is mostly to come up with norms and standards, as well as regulations and policies. And the role of provincial departments is to implement those policies. Unfortunately, Counsel, something that I've been, through you, Justice, I've been canvassing in cabinet for quite a long time. This issue of concurrency is quite complex and very difficult at times. But it also, when you look at the Public Finance Management Act and the Public Service Act, both myself and the MECs are what is called executing authorities, meaning we have got powers to execute and take final decisions on any matter, meaning then that you have got an MEC in a province who's an executing authority, but equally a minister at national level, who in his own power is an executing authority. But now, because these powers are concurrent, quite a number of people believe the minister wields power over all the MECs, which is not necessarily the case. For instance, in 4 very important issues, which I even took to Parliament in August last year, to complain to members of Portfolio Committee that they must help us change that state of affairs. The issue of human resources, who gets hired at what level, it's not a concurrent function, it's a provincial function. There are people who have always asked me, why don't you fire this MEC? Why don't you appoint a better MEC? I don't have those powers at all. They vest in the hands of the Premier. So the issue of human resources, there are doctors who get fired and believe they've been fired unfairly, and they approach the minister for relief. If you look at that function, the minister gets in nowhere at all. The hiring or firing of doctors, nurses, etc., I don't have any powers over them. The only thing I can do is to persuade. That is the first one. The second one is financial management. There are people who believe ministers are the ones who decide on how much money must go to provincial departments of health at amounts. And I hope MEC Barbara Creasy has clarified it. Throughout her testimony, I'm sure he never mentioned the minister in giving finances, what program must get how much, etc. So financial management is purely in provinces. The third one is procurement and supply chain. As to what gets procured and get bought in provincial departments of health is a function of the executing authority and the accounting officer in that province, who is the MEC and the HOD. The last one is maintenance of equipment and infrastructure. I know people usually phone me and say, hey, this lift is not working in the hospital, minister, can you do something? I don't have any powers on those, unfortunately. Now, the unfortunate part, Council, through you, Justice, is that these 4 are the cornerstones of the healthcare system. If you fail on these 4, human resources, financial management, procurement, maintenance of equipment and infrastructure, if you fail on these 4, there's no health system, it collapses. And unfortunately, all those powers are not with the minister. And I thought it's important for all these issues to be understood, because many people do not necessarily understand them.
Thank you, Minister. At the outset, you have mentioned that your involvement is at the level of policy formulation. It is common cause that these proceedings relate to matters in respect of mental health care users. I would like you to assist these proceedings with regard to your involvement in the formulation of policy in that aspect. I'm going to ask someone to assist you to locate a file which is part of the record. Is file...
Is it this one?
No, file 4. File 4, there's someone who will be able to assist you.
It will be brought to you, Minister.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
File 4, if you can turn to page 1358.
Yes. I can see it. But these letters are very small. Yes, I can see it, Council. Okay. Instead of this?
Yes, if you can make use of the document which has just been given to you.
Okay.
I think that will be of assistance. I would like you to express your involvement with regard to policy formulation with reference to the document that is before you titled National Mental Health Policy Framework and Strategic Plan 2013 to 2020.
Yes, Council, this document is a document that guides how we implement the mental health services in the country. It's a policy framework, as it says, and also a strategic plan. It came into being after the World Health Organization got worried about the issue of mental health globally, that it is generally neglected, it is not funded like the other functions, and there's no involvement of families in the care of mental health users globally. And the Director General of the World Organization was instructed by the World Health Assembly to do something about it, which the Director General did. And eventually, the World Health Organization came with Mental Health Action Plan 2013 to 2020, which document is here in front of me. And in the foreword of the document, the Director General, or the then Director General, Dr. Margaret Chan, said mental health matters, but the world has a long way to go to achieve it. Many unfortunate trends must be reversed. And he says the trends are neglect of mental health services and care, and abuses of human rights, and discrimination against people with mental disorders and psychosocial disabilities. These are the words of Dr. Margaret Chan. And then he said, the objective of, this plan has got 4 objectives. The first one, to provide more effective leadership and governance on mental health. That's the first objective. The second one, provision of comprehensive integrated mental health and social care services in community-based settings. That's the second objective. The third one, implementation of strategies from promotion and prevention. And lastly, strengthening information systems, evidence, and research. These are the 4 main objectives of this mental health action plan. After it was drawn up, it was then felt that it needs to be localized to countries. This is a global policy with the 4 objectives. But obviously, countries are not the same. For instance, what they do in the UK will not be the same that I can afford to do in South Africa or another country in sub-Saharan Africa can do. So we had to localize it. And in localizing it, we realized that we need to come up with our own strategic plan. But we did not just sit as a minister or as a national department and say we are drawing a strategic plan. We first asked all our provinces to hold mental health summits where they must call all the relevant stakeholders, the communities, civil society, the academics, and experts. And all provinces did so. And that culminated into a national mental health summit, which was held in Ukuruleni. And the mental health summit was not just an ordinary summit because we didn't just wanted to go through the motions. We wanted to come up with a clear country plan, strategic plan on mental health. So for that reason, we called experts. We called the director of mental health and psychosocial services from the World Health Organization to come and be with us and guide us. And we also called the country director of the World Organization in South Africa, and also the head of mental health in the whole African region of the World Health Organization, because the World Organization has got 6 regions globally. One of them is called Afro. So we called those, and we even called the judiciary. Judge Jody Kolapen was invited specifically because he was the chairperson of the Human Rights Commission before he became a judge. These are the people who guided us. Now, at the end of that summit, we came up with something called Ekurhuleni Declaration, which is inside this document. And that Ekurhuleni Declaration then, after all those processes, led us to develop this National Mental Health Policy Framework and Strategic Plan 2013 to 2020. And it's supposed to be the document that guides all our provinces or anybody who want to provide mental health care services in the country. That's the role one has played.
Then in terms of this strategic plan, what are the areas of emphasis in relation to issues relating to mental health?
Well, remember that this document is also stemming from the National Health Act. Yes. Act number 17 of 2003, the Mental Health Act, I mean to say. The document also stems from it because you can't draw a strategic plan and a policy document outside the framework of the law, of the Act. Yes. So the Act was also guiding us. Now, I want to start there, Council, because it's important. The Mental Health Act, Act number 18 of I think it's 17. Forgive me about that. I think it's 17 years. Of 2003. It was replacing Mental Health Act, which I think is number 18 of 1973. It was replacing it. And the reason that it got replaced through you, Justice, is that Act number 18 of 1973 was giving immense powers to the minister in terms of mental health. Nothing could happen without me. Even the president, there are areas where they say the president, meaning the president of the country, must do ABC in regard to mental health. So it was giving a lot of powers, but it was devoid of human rights completely. Now, Act number 17 of 2003 was supposed to give that impetus to human rights. In other words, the core of the whole legislation on mental health is about human rights, seeing that you are dealing with vulnerable people. Now, the irony of that is that in that process, all the powers which the minister had, sometimes including the powers of the president, were taken down to the level of the MEC. And the MEC was given all those powers in terms of the 2003 Mental Health Act, so that they could, as the executing authority, do that. And the objectives were noble. It was thought that the minister is sitting high up there. The service, all the services are in the provinces. So it's better to take the authority to the provinces so that when people have to implement, they don't have to wait for authority from above, either from the president or the minister. They've got the authority right in their hands. So those powers were taken down from the national to the provincial level. Now, this document obviously was based on that. But there were very serious check and balances. Seeing that the power is now devolved to provinces, we had to put in lots of checks and balances. And one of the most important, powerful check and balance, Justice, is the mental review boards.
Sorry to interrupt you. Like, before you get to that point, can you just explain the organization of the mental health services in relation to that document at page 22? And in the record, it will be file 4, page 1368.
Oh, yes. Yes. You know, this document is quite big. But page 22 is a summary of what this document is all about. Yes, Council, it actually outlines the organization of services in terms of what Dr. Margaret Chan has said. And if you look at it, it's in to make it easier, they put it in a form of a pyramid, so that even if you don't read this document, you just look at this pyramid. It summarizes for you. At the tip of the pyramid, right at the top, it says long stay facilities and specialist psychiatric services. And I'll tell you the significance of that, because there has been this word called deinstitutionalization, repeated all the time since this saga. Deinstitutionalization, deinstitutionalization. I'm actually trying to scratch my mind to find out where this word comes from, because I'm not sure. No, I'm not joking, I'm not sure, Justice. Because if you look at the Mental Health Action Plan 2013 to 2020 of the World Organization, it does not actually mention the word institutionalization. They talk about community-based mental health care services. That does not mean deinstitutionalization. And the top of the pyramid says long-stay facilities and specialist psychiatric services, simply because not all mental health care users can ever be deinstitutionalized or be sent to the community. There are people who have to be in an institution, unfortunately, unpalatable as it is. In other words, you can't take a collective decision that I'm now deinstitutionalizing or I'm doing community health care and everybody must leave an institution. There are just people who won't leave. Justice, I'm sure you are aware, even in correctional services, the same. There are people who are in jail, unfortunately. Oh, I'm using a very wrong analogy because these people are not in jail, so let me leave it. My apologies. But I just want to show that there are people who, unfortunately, against all our wishes, have to stay in an institution because of their condition. Now, below that tip of the pyramid follows two things which are in parallel. One is psychiatric services in general hospitals, that you can actually provide these psychiatric services in general hospital like any other hospital, rather than a special psychiatric hospital. Then next to it, it says community mental health services, which is what the document of the World Organization is all about, community mental health services. Then below that, it says primary health care services for mental health. I'm sure you are aware of the definition of primary health care. It's a basic health care service that has got three characteristics. One is prevention of diseases. Two is promotion of health. And three is when you use the healthcare system, you must stop that at the bottom, not at the top, not at tertiary service, etc. You must start with the clinics. That's why we're in the process of improving our clinics to become ideal. After that, as you move to the base of the pyramid, it's informal community care, where you can provide mental health care services informally in communities. And at the bottom of the pyramid, it says self-care. This is how mental health services will be provided in the country. And as you can see, the word deinstitutionalization doesn't appear on this pyramid, unfortunately. That's why I say sometimes I get very confused as to where did it ever emerge, where was it started being used officially in government documents, because I'm not sure. Let me leave it there, I'm not sure.
Would informal community care imply accommodation and institutionalization? In other words, is that a layer of service inclusive of continual care of chronic patients? Or is it just a layer that would give support? In other words, simpler put...
What it means, Justice, is that all these layers of the pyramid can coexist when you provide mental health care services. It's a guidance that all of them can coexist, and they can all be applied depending on a particular mental health care user and depending on a particular setting. But all I'm saying is that the word deinstitutionalization, because my worry, Justice, is that people believe deinstitutionalization means moving people out of the top layer, the tip, the long stay facilities and specialized psychiatric services.
Where would an NGO fit in the pyramid, if anywhere?
Well, according to this document, Justice, it says the government must fund NGOs. in order for the NGOs to capacitate these layers. For instance, if you think there's a community mental health service provided in a particular community, you can fund an NGO that goes to train those people on how to do it. You can also, if self-care, it means a person who's better off, who understands that is mentally ill but needs self-care and support, you can get NGOs to help them. Now, I had arguments that, yes, NGOs can also, because there are many already in the country who are dealing with mental health care services. But unfortunately, in this booklet, we did not necessarily put that directly, because justice, when you remove a person from a big mental institution and put them in an NGO, that is still institutionalization. You are just deinstitutionalizing them from a bigger institution to a smaller one, which might even be more restrictive. If you look at the Ombuds's report, he is saying so, that he's worried that mental health care users were removed from a more freer environment, which is bigger, to a small house. I heard you, Chief Justice, congratulating the MEC for Health for you coming from the same village in Atteridgeville. Yeah. Unfortunately, that's where most of the mental health care users died, in a very small place. Yes. Oh, that was not meant to be. Chief Justice, I hope that did not mean to be any pun or what. I'm just saying so. Now, if you read about the Ombuds, about where they died.
I'm not sure if the pun was unintended, Minister.
Absolutely unintended, Justice.
I'm not certain.
I realized it when they are laughing. Absolutely. I was just wanted to give this example. Where they died is restricted. You just remove them from an institution where they were freer, they could move about, to a I mean, the reason that I'm quoting Atteridgeville, you know the yards there. The apartheid system, which was putting people in areas where the yards are very small. How then do you put mental health care users in that institution? It's just something that can't happen or cannot be allowed.
To get to the next step, Minister, the takeaway here is the decision was totally irrational and inconsistent, certainly, with the policy framework, and also, obviously, plainly inconsistent with the Mental Health Care Act. Isn't it so?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that appears in the Ombuds report.
Yes, in the Ombuds report. And the decision to shut down all of Life Esidimeni is equally irrational from what you're saying. You're urging us to take away that you cannot possibly have everybody being suitable to be moved to an NGO.
Well, you can close Life Esidimeni if there are compelling reasons. But then, with the understanding that the people, if you send them to communities, some of them need to go to an institution. And we've got institutions which are equal to Life Esidimeni, if not better, like Sterkfontein and, Vescopis, etc., which have been there for ages, where people have not experienced what they experienced when they moved out. So
of course,
the closure itself, if there are very good, compelling reason, it's not necessarily wrong, but the question is, where are you taking the people to?
Yes, that must be correct. I don't want to digress unduly. I think, Council, you must go ahead. But we know that SABC went to all of the institutions, the excellent ones you're talking about, and they were full. And that long waiting lists. So the decision to close Life Esidimeni was irrational just from that point of view alone, because there was no institution that, in fact, could receive chronic patients from Life Esidimeni.
There is a structure specifically established in terms of the Act, which should have done that, not SADC, actually. There is a legal structure. And it's not only a structure, it's a quasi-judicial structure. And in my layman's term, Justice, I understand a quasi-judicial structure, the only person more powerful than it in this whole house will be yourself as a judge. All the others, including myself, will fall under that quasi-judicial structure in terms of their decision. They are the ones who should have visited there. If somebody is saying, I want to send these patients to Sterkfontein, they are the ones who should have gone there. And they are called the Mental Health Review Board. The review board, they are the ones who should have, they had powers, not SADC didn't have powers. They just work in mental health, they can just advise. But that Mental Health Review Board has got powers to go and say, no, it can't happen. We want to start Sterkfontein and this and that reason, no, this cannot happen. And so nobody can go there.
Minister, we have come to know that when Life Esidimeni was closed down, the mental health care users were sent to various NGOs. You have just mentioned the Mental Health Review Board as a body which should have intervened during that transfer. I just want you to elaborate further on that matter with reference to a document which is supposed to be before you. We have marked it ELA 170. It has been circulated.
Oh. This blue one.
Yes.
Yes.
If you can proceed to elaborate as to how could they have assisted or intervened when these mental health care users were removed from Life Esidimeni. We will deal with when the date during which you have become aware, but like if you can just try and assist and elaborate on the roles of the Mental Health Review Board.
Through you, Justice, I want to put it on record that of all the checks and balances to safeguard the right of mental health care users in terms of Act number 17 of 2003, which specifically, among other things, was established, the Mental Review Board, the Act was specifically saying the Act is being enacted, one of the main reasons being to establish Mental Health Review Board. If there is any structure that was specifically put in place to protect the rights of mental health care users, is the Mental Health Review Board. And to that extent, in 2007, the Department of Health produced a document, Mental Health Review Board, Orientation Guideline and Procedure Manual. That was long before I came into the Department of Health, because the foreword to this document was written by Deputy Minister Nosizo Madlala Rutledge, who was the Deputy Minister at that time in 2007, just to emphasize the powers which was being given to Mental Health Review Board.
But you know, Minister, let me just come in there. Late in the day, the evidence shows us that that review board collapsed completely. It believed it was hired by the MEC. It believed that it was simply on a payroll and that they had to do their work. So I wonder how much time we want to spend on that. The evidence shows that they collapsed completely, misunderstood their role, and in fact, because of their inaction, all these safeguards were never helpful to anybody. If anything, they worsened the position of the mental health care users. So we'll have to decide just how much time we spend on the framework in the face of this devastation.
I'll spend a few minutes,
Yes,
but I think, yes, I think it's important, Justice, because I'll tell you why. In the UMPA's report, it said the Gauteng Mental Health Review Board was moribund, and the UMPA's recommended that the chairperson be charged. And the chairperson went through that DC and was not found guilty. And I think we discussed with the PM and MEC that we need to review. Actually, more than the UMBAT, as I'm sitting here, I am surprised why this should just be a neglect of duty, I suspect it's a criminal conduct, which must be charged criminally. And I will tell you that, and I'm saying this with all due respect, Justice. What happens if a judge fails to perform their duty? I'm sure you'll know, but if a judge who's supposed to sit on a case that will save human beings dismally fails to discharge their duties to an extent that those human beings perish. And I want to read just, 4 lines.
Yes, certainly.
In other words, it's
Yes.
sort of 4 paragraphs. I'm leading it in lines. In the introduction of this document, which is guiding document, Deputy Minister Routledge says, in this orientation, guidance, and procedure manual, we examine the context of the establishment of the review boards, why they are critical to promoting human rights and justice, and how they can effectively function in the best interest of users. She goes on to say, as a quasi-judicial authority, boards have significant legal powers that must be administered with clear knowledge and understanding of the intention and spirit of Mental Health Care Act, as well as international and regional treaties and guidelines, and inform the existence of functioning. This is what you are saying. And now it goes on to say, this is the 3rd one I'm reading, so I'm not going to take a very long time. It goes on to say, they should adopt an attitude of active inquiry. This means looking beyond the documents and other evidence before them in order to assess whether particular recommendations or decisions are indeed in the best interest of users, or whether they reflect no more than the usual way of doing things, or are for the convenience of others, meaning others rather than mental health care users. Yeah. And it ends by saying, particular vigilance is needed in the case of users who have been receiving care, treatment, and rehabilitation over extended periods of time. To me, this speaks directly to Esidimeni. That particular vigilance in that case, because these are users which have been there for a long time. The last one I want to read, it says, they should be seen as independent in reaching decisions. This means taking an impartial and unbiased approach and being open to hearing and weighing a variety of standpoints, including those of the user himself or herself, before making a decision. This places particular demands on review board members, more so if they are mental health care practitioners who happen to be in the employ of the state. They need to ensure that no questions can be raised regarding their independence in considering cases involving state institutions. This I believe. Yes. Now, I understand some said they did not know their functions. They did not know that this function exists. They allowed Dr. Manamela to appoint them as public servants. I won't easily accept that justice. They were appointed by the MEC Julie in terms of the law in November.
Minister, there is a document which has been placed before you. It's LR 171. Are you able to deal with that document? Do you recognize that document?
Yes, because I was saying, yes, it's exactly what I was talking about. I won't really accept it. They were appointed in November of 2015. Their first meeting in Gauteng was on the 6th of January 2016. And in their minutes, they say a copy of this guideline was distributed to all members and they were requested to go through it. And the resolution of that meeting says the orientation guidelines will be then discussed in the next meeting. That means take this copy, go and study it. In the next meeting, we then discuss
Well,
it.
we know, Minister. Thank you for that. We've spent quite a bit of time already with them here, interrogating the framework, and we're very alive to it because council spent a lot of time on it. Moribund means, you would know better than us, you're a doctor. Moribund means near dead.
Yes. And I'm saying I wonder whether that near death is not a criminal activity
Well,
for people of that nature.
we've looked at the provisions, and in fact, I don't want to express myself now. Still being a judge, I think I will leave it to there. But we hear the point. They came here and said they believe they were employed and they received 30,000 rand a month and something like that, and they were happy to do that. But council, you'll have to decide which are the areas which the minister is going to canvass.
Thank you.
It's nearly 7 p.m. So, and we are on the last witness. So you have to pick your priorities on what would be appropriate as a closing evidence for this hearing, which has been here for many, many weeks.
We are mindful
But
of
you're the one to guide us.
We are mindful of the time, and taking into account that there's going to be cross-examination, I do not want to approach the examination in chief on assumption that questions are not going to be asked. The witness will have to cover what he considers to be important aspects in order to educate all of us in relation to matters which are very important to these proceedings.
Yes, very well. It's a very senior witness, and that's why we allow the latitude. And the minister is aware of what has been said up to now and what is appropriate at this stage.
Yes.
So we should maybe allow him a bit of freewheeling, but to get to the issues that he really would like to express.
Thank you, Justice.
The facts have all been put before us. We have loads and loads of facts already. So I leave it to you and the minister, but choose what is narrow, appropriate for the last witness for the day.
Thank you,
and
Justice.
it's arguably the most senior official to testify before us.
I'll do so, Justice, to limit the questions.
Yes.
Minister, we have come to know that the mental health care users, or some of them, were transferred from Life Esidimeni without their records, and they were transferred to various NGOs. You have been dealing with issues relating to checks and balances. Can you please just assist us to explain what was the role of the doctors at Life Esidimeni when patients were transferred from their institutions?
I wouldn't know because I was not aware that they are actually doing that. But what I do know is the role of a doctor in discharging any patient, whether a mental health care user or any other patient, because I've worked through that and it has always been a sore point, Justice. Doctors discharge patients not on the basis of groups. That's not allowed. You can't sit as a doctor and say, this group of patients, I'm discharging them because of this and that reason. Each patient must be discharged as an individual. And the decision to discharge is the decision of the doctor and the doctor only. And is based on clinical grounds and no other ground whatsoever, just clinical. And that doctor can take that decision and nobody, even the minister, can stop that doctor. For instance, if I go to a hospital and say, this ICU is full and the government doesn't have money, please discharge this patient. No doctor is allowed to do that, or no doctor should actually do that. If I insist, because in the Public Service Act says, if somebody who's senior to you forces you to do something that is illegal, unethical, or bordering on corruption or fraud, what do you do? And I've made this a standard question when I interview people. In the public service, it says it must be done in writing. Nobody must instruct you verbally to do something like that. It's not allowed. You just refuse. it must be done in writing. Now, if I then write and say discharge these people because the ICU is full and all that, the doctor ought to say, no, I can't. And what will then happen? For instance, if it is your wife, Justice, who you come and say, please discharge my wife. I want a home. Yes, I want a home, and you give very good reasons. And the doctor examines that, the lady and clinically says, no, she's not ready for discharge, and you have to insist. The law provides for what is called an RHT. He must then give you a form called RHT, refuse hospital treatment. You sign it. Then the doctor is in the clear because he's not discharging you. You are refusing hospital treatment. He is not prepared to discharge you. And I believe in this case, in any case where patients need to be discharged, I believe in that. I know, Justice, you're saying this is late in the day, but I want to give you an example because it happened to me and I'm just talking
Well,
through
I'm
it.
worried. First it was my village, now it's my wife. So
Apologies once more. Apologies
so I
once
fear
more.
for the example, the next example that will come.
No. It won't come into view. But it's a very important example. In 1981, the then president of South Africa, in apartheid South Africa, P.W. Botha, wanted to do something called consolidation of homelands. That means redrawing borders. There is a hospital in Limpopo called Shiluvane, which is a Shangaan name, but the hospital was falling under Lebowa government. The consolidation of the borders made it fall under Gazangulu government. I was still a medical student, but we were made to understand patients were taken out of there to their own tribal group hospital in terms of P.W. Botha's rule. That I was not involved with, but how I came to know about it was in 1985. I was working in Mapulaneng Hospital. 5 members of the Lebowa Legislative Assembly arrived in the hospital and said they want all the Shangaans to be discussed. They are cheated because they are paying revenge to what they did to the Bedis. And I'm a Bedi, by the way. What they did to the Bedis in 1981 when I was a student. Our superintendent called us. The other doctors were Swiss doctors. They knew nothing about our politics. There were only 4 of us from South Africa who were Africans. And he told us that, no, these guys, they come from parliament, they say you must discharge these people. We said, no, never. The only reason we'll discharge any patient, and individually, is on clinical grounds and nothing else. There can't be any other rule, whether it's from parliament or not. And we told them we're not going to discharge them. And they said they will fire us and all that. We said, no, you go in, discharge them. When you finish, when the last patient leaves, we live with them. We'll never work in this hospital. We'll go and look for jobs elsewhere. I'm trying to show that doctors have got power to protect patients from any artificial discharge. And that is our second mechanism, just like the Mental Health Review Board. And all those mechanisms were breached. That's what makes me cry about this situation, that we put up an act which protects human rights, and the human rights are completely thrown out of the window. All the systems that you put in place, people just ignore them. So I'm not being a populist when I'm saying, I'm wondering whether this does not border on criminal activity. Because these are the people who have got more powers than me. Why am I saying so? The quasi-judicial mental review board has got more powers than me. The doctor in discharging a patient has got more powers than me as a minister. I can't distract that doctor and say, discharge this patient if they think it's not justified.
Minister, the doctors at Life Esidimeni were relying on the cancellation of the contract that it had with the department. What will be your response from the explanation that you have given?
The cancellation of a contract is a government or governance or political activity, whichever, where you take it. But I'm maintaining that regardless of that, my relationship with the patient is not governed by that. That's why there's a Hippocratic oath. between me and the patient. I might be having a contract with my employer who instruct me, but my contract with the patient is stronger than my contract with the employer because this patient life is in my hands.
You see, Counsel, is the question that, or does the question imply that doctors at Life's Esidimeni discharged the patients? Because the evidence seems to be different, though, isn't it?
Well, Justice, like I'm trying to lead the witness on the aspect that he has indicated in relation to the checks and balances of the doctors at institutions at which they have been looked after. So I'm just trying to make a comparison in relation to the doctors at Life Esidimeni as to whether did they have any obligation to have either refused to allow the patients from leaving the premises.
Well, the evidence before us is there was no formal process of a discharge, isn't it?
Yes, like
you can't point to a process of a discharge on the evidence. Can one do that? The patients were basically apportioned out.
Stolen.
Yes, they were contained or whatever the name was. But I mean, we didn't have a formal process where every patient individually was examined and was certified that they were properly due for a discharge from the facility. The facility was shut down and the patients were carted in a variety of modes of transport to different places where they were admitted again without any doctors. I thought that is the evidence.
Well, Justice, what we know is that the doctors at Life Esidimeni were aware when the patients were being transferred. So I'm trying to test with the witness as to whether could there have been any role on their part when the patients were being removed from the facility.
Is the implication that they ought to have resisted?
Well, like I'm trying to test that with the witness.
Okay.
Well, I've just outlined the role that doctors play. If it was me, I won't discharge anybody because I'm being instructed to do so unduly by any authority whatsoever. Unless, and I'm emphasizing, unless it's an order of court, as you know, in which case I can't stand in contempt of court. So I was not speaking about Life Esidimeni specifically. I was speaking about the duties of each and every doctor in discharge. But if the patient is taken away from the hospital in any other activity, like the example I've given, if the members of the Motsoaledi government at that time got in and took anybody and threw them out, it's not me because I didn't sign there and say clinically I'm discharging this patient. Yes.
To cut to the chase, because we're getting it secondhand, you got it secondhand like us. The evidence is quite clear. It was a brutal process. Patients were bundled up with their little belongings into a variety of vehicles, and they were portioned and parceled out to different NGOs. And the admissions had no proper process where doctors were involved, except possibly a few instances. And at NGOs, there were no doctors in any event.
In that case, they were not discharged. And what the police need to investigate is whether that is an abduction. Yes, honestly, they need to. Whether people have been abducted or kidnapped or whatever, the police need to find out because it means legally they were never discharged, those
Yes,
people.
there are many breaches of the Mental Health Care Act, Doctor, no doubt, and you know them better than all of us. And I hope the police will go and look. There are many offenses. That statute creates a number of offenses. And I'm sure the police and the NDPP will go and look carefully at the evidence we already have. Counsel, where next do we go?
Minister, let's now deal with what has been termed the Marathon Project. The project which was responsible for the transfer of mental health care users. Can you just indicate at what stage or when did you become aware of the number of deaths which resulted from the implementation of the marathon project?
I became aware on the 13th of September when the then MEC was answering a question in the legislature and say 36 people have died in NGOs. That's when I became aware that people have died and the number was put at 36.
Was there at any stage that any member of the civil society could have alerted you of the impending implementation of the marathon project?
That there is something called Gauteng Mental Health Marathon Project. I read it for the first time in the UMBA's report. That there was marathon, a project called the Marathon Project. The part that I knew was that Section 27 did approach the DG at the end of 2015 about the issue of the contract between Esidimeni and Gauteng Department of Health. And the DG informed me about it and said, no, she's taking up the matter with an HOD because it looked like an administrative programmatic issue rather than a important governance or political issue, which I may say, which decision must be taken at the political level. She said, no, she's conducting the HOD and they are dealing with it. Then from there, I think, because they were threatening to take me and the Premier of Gauteng to court, and the DG said, no, what has my minister done? And he then said, no, it is this type of project, but I'll deal with the HOD. And from what I heard, the DG then conducted the HOD, and both Section 27 and Gauteng Department met, and instead of going to court on the 22nd of November, they reached an out-of-court settlement and drew a document on what's going to happen, which looked very good from what I've heard and from when I saw it later, that it was a very good document. It was agreements, which in the presentation to the UMBAs, the DG says she regrets why she didn't insist that it be an order of court. And she did not insist because the then HOD of Gauteng, Dr. Silvano, said, DG, why are we going to be forced to have this as an order of court? Because we are agreeing. We are agreeing with Section 27. We are agreeing that we'll work together. We are agreeing that we'll do ABC. That's the part I knew.
You have just mentioned that the National Director of Health was in contact with Section 27 in relation to these court proceedings.
The Director General, you want to say?
In the Department of Health.
Yes, Director General, not
Yes.
Director.
Yes.
Okay.
I just want to find out from you, did you ever make any contact with any member of Section 27 in relation to those matters?
You mean at that time, before the court case, etc.?
Yes.
No, I can't remember that.
Okay.
I can't remember that, except the letter that they've written to tell the National Department about this issue, which
Yes.
matter I said was taken over by the DG. The conduct, which I remember very well, was when Mr. Makhewood phoned me after these announcements in the legislature, because
Okay.
my memory serves very well, he was distressed as much as I was distressed about what has happened.
Yes. So you spoke to Mark Haywood after the announcement?
I remember.
Yes.
I speak to him quite often, lots of times.
Yes.
But I seem to remember that, yes, there was a discussion after the death, but the verbal discussion before that, I don't remember it.
Very well. Let's then deal with the measures or steps that you have taken once you have learned that this tragedy had actually occurred.
Well, the first thing I wanted to understand, what actually happened? How do people go and die in NGOs in such large numbers? I wanted to understand that from the MEC, because also it occurred to me that we have got the National Health Council. That's my other point of contact with the MECs. It's a statutory structure, National Health Council, which I chair. It consists of all the MECs, all the HODs, SALGA representative, and the head of South African Military Health Service or the Surgeon General, where every huge project is decided there and must be discussed there. So I don't remember in the National Health Council us sitting and discussing a huge project where people, large number of people will be taken to NGOs to an extent where they die. So fortunately, the MEC, the then MEC had an appointment with me to talk about Nelson Mandela Children's Hospital, which was on the 14th. So I waited for her. When she came, I told her, I asked her first about this issue that I heard that in the legislature you announced the death of 36 people, which is something that is quite scary and horrible, that something like that must happen. We need to know, and hence I told her, I am going to ask the UMBAT to conduct an investigation. That was on the 14th. I said I'll ask the UMBAT. I'm just informing you because the UMBAT might approach you to like cooperation. And the reason that I thought about the UMBAT justice was because the UMBAT was specifically the office to establish that office of UMBAT was specifically my idea. I was getting tired of people who actually receive bad treatment from our healthcare facilities. They run to newspapers, there are headlines for a week, and they forget about them. What happened? Then I said, we need to have a public protector for health. That's the word I used, the public protector for health. The person who works like a public protector to protect specifically health, people who use our health facilities, not only mental health users. And the UMBAT was then established by amendment of National Health Act 2003. We put in an amendment. He was appointed in terms of Section 81 of that amendment. And coincidentally, the UMBAT was appointed officially by myself in terms of the act in June that year. His first ever job was Life Esidimeni. I never knew that he was going to have such a huge, impactful job when he was appointed. So I thought about him immediately when this happened, and I phoned him. Unfortunately, I was on my way to Canada to attend the Global Fund meeting. I said, UMBAT, this is what has happened. You must investigate. But because I'm on my way to Canada, be gathering facts. When I come back, I'll give you an official letter of appointment. Not as an UMBAT. He was already appointed. I've already given that letter for appointment specifically to do this job, to outline what you must do. And I did so, and I left to Canada. On the 26th, when I came back, I actually gave him that letter. And the UMBAT logged it in terms of the act. When somebody, by the way, who lodges a complaint with the UMBAT? Any member of society, any human being can do so. And once you lodge that complaint with the UMBAT, he must log it in, he or she must log it in and give you the log number. And the log number given to me was number 230 of 15/9/2016. That number was logged for me and Section 27, for both of us, because the UMBAT then said, Minister, while you lodged a complaint, Section 27 also did so. Yours came first, but because you did not put it in writing, Section 27 did so. Your writing only happened on the 26th. I'm logging both of you. And the log number 230 belongs to both you and Section 27, as the people who have lodged this complaint.
Well, the MEC says she did. MEC Mahlangu.
She did what?
She initiated and instituted a complaint with the Ombud to conduct the investigation.
Well, if she did it before me, then I was not aware. I'm sure the UMBAT can answer that. Because he told me that the log number 230 is for me and Section 27 because we lodged the complaint He never said anything about the MEC. If he did, I'm sure he'll be the right one to answer that question, Justice.
Counsel.
Thank you, Minister. And then once, I mean, like after having lodged this complaint with the Ombud, what other measures did you take in relation to those mental health care users who were transferred to the NGOs?
I arrived in Canada. Then it occurred to me, because I spoke to him on the 14th, and we agreed that when I come back, I'll write him the letter, but he must start gathering facts. I arrived in Canada. It just occurred to me, by the way, I don't even know the conditions under which these people died. And the Umbud is still going to gather facts and wait for me because I was going to go via New York to attend the United Nations General Assembly. I said, what if whatever is killing these people, what if it continues? By the time I come back, and what if it continues? I then realized this is trouble. The Umbud is not going to help to stop more death. I've got a Ministerial Advisory Committee, which has just been appointed in terms of this act, and we appointed it, I think, I can't remember the date. It was quite recent, which is chaired by the head of psychiatry at Sefako Makati University, Professor Diamond. I then phoned him. I said, Prof, this has happened. I've officially asked the Umbud, but I'm scared that more people must die. Please, can you, over this weekend, visit all these NGOs, especially the ones where lots of people died, see what is happening there, and don't wait for anything. This is a state of emergency now. I didn't even know whether I've got those powers in state of emergency or what. I said close them down immediately. Wherever you see that there's a possibility of somebody dying, close it down immediately. We'll come and talk about the legalities later. That's what I told them. But then they said, no, we need a written document because it's a serious matter. And right from Canada, my office told me it's possible. They then wrote a memo. We defined the purpose, what must happen, the budget, what the committee must do, who must be in the committee, and I signed it and I sent it. I then phoned the MEC and Dr. Sullivan. I told them that I've just appointed the Ministerial Committee to do work before the Umbud to save lives, and I want you to cooperate with them. The MEC then said, no, she would like to go with them wherever they're going. I said, fine. You can accompany them because anyway, they were going to look for the list of the NGOs from you. I then hear from Professor Rataiman that one of the first NGOs they visited, I don't know in what order they visited, is Precious Angels in Attridgeville. Unfortunately, this is a fact, a justice. It's just a fact. And they found the situation scaring. And Professor Rataiman phoned me and said, this is absolutely horrendous. And I said, close it. He said, no, you, Minister, and me do not have powers to close any institutions that was contracted by Gauteng. Gauteng must close it. And so he spoke to them. And I said, what if they refuse for whatever reason? But fortunately, they never refused. He asked them, he asked the HOD. In fact, he said when they visited Precious Angels, they were with the HOD, Dr. Silubano. They told him, no, close this issue, these Precious Angels immediately. And I understand then they even reached to the MEC because Dr. Silubano, according to Professor Rataiman, was doubtful. And the MEC said, I'll close it. And I told them that if she didn't close it, I was going to go to court immediately because I don't have any legal powers to do that. I was going to ask the court to give me powers to close it. And so Precious Angels was closed immediately. From there, 4 other NGOs were closed by the Umbud. As he started, seeing that example, that even if the report is not yet out, where you see that more human beings might die, we have got to act.
What has been your interaction with the Premier of Gauteng in relation to the intervention measures that you had taken?
Of course, the Gauteng Premier being the boss of the MEC, I had lots of discussion with him. because I also wanted to understand does he understand about this. I'm not in the Gauteng legislature. He's the most senior person in government. I wanted to ask him, what is this whole thing of these people who have died? But I said, Premier, the most important thing, because I also have to inform him that I've asked the Umbas to investigate, he must know. But I said the most important thing now is to stop more deaths. And we need to do so. And I was happy to see in the Umbas report later, 3 months later, that act actually stopped more deaths from occurring. And I said, Premier, this is what we are going to do. There is the office. That's why if the MEC refused, when the Ministerial Committee said precious entries must be closed, I said I was going to go to court. But obviously, I was going to the Premier first, because he has got power over the MEC, not me. And that's another issue which people don't know. They believe we have got powers to instruct MECs. When I told you they are executing authority, they might cooperate, they might not. Fortunately, in most cases, they cooperate, but not in this case of Gauteng, so-called Gauteng Marathon Project. There was no cooperation.
Thank you, Minister. As I've said earlier on, that you have been requested to proffer an apology to the affected family members. I would like to pause at this juncture to allow the families, through their legal representatives, to pose any questions to you, and then you'll thereafter render your apology to the family members. Those are my questions in examination, Justice.
Thank you, Counsel. Thank you, Minister. There are 4 sets of advocates, so there's going to be a bit of a grind here. Let's see how many questions they have for you. Advocate Hassan or Advocate Stein?
Thank you, Justice. Advocate Stein will conduct the cross-examination.
Advocate?
Advocate Stein, Minister. My name is Nikki Stein.
Nikki Stein.
And I appear with and am led by Advocate Hassim, representing bereaved family members.
Okay.
Minister, I'd like to start off by thanking you on behalf of the family members for appearing at this arbitration and for availing yourself to give evidence and availing yourself at such a late hour. I hope not to keep you too long. I would like to just address 2 issues with you before we move on. The first being recommendation 14 of the Health Ombuds recommendation. I will read to you the relevant portion. If you'd like to follow, it's in file 1 at page 58.
Is this file 1?
Somebody will come and give you a copy of file 1.
At page?
At page 58.
Oh, the file is overfull, it's flowing over. I'm sure they'll come and rearrange it. I'm sorry, yes. Yes, I can see page 58.
Are you at page 58?
Yes.
Okay. Minister, you spoke in your evidence in chief about some of the challenges that you faced with the national and provincial, the relationship between the national and provincial health departments. Recommendation 14 of the Ombud reads in part, there is an urgent need to review the National Health Act of 2003 and the Mental Health Care Act of 2002 to harmonize and bring alignment to different spheres of government. I take it, in the light of your examination in chief, that you agree with this recommendation.
Absolutely.
Has this review of the Mental Health Care Act and the National Health Act commenced?
Oh yes, in fact, I'm made to understand that we are likely to get a report by the end of March. It's been done by the Law Reform Commission, because what the Ombuds here is saying is that some of the things in that act have led to this, and I say that's why I'm saying it's an irony The act was supposed to make sure that human rights, are respected. But it so happened that there was weakness because the powers were taken from above to a lower level where they thought services were, and it led to something like this. So they said they must be reviewed, and they are being reviewed wildly, both the National Health Act and the Mental Health Act. And the GG, as Stas told me, I'm speaking under correction from her, that the Law Reform Commission told her that they are like to give us the first draft in March, because it started immediately after the Umbat's report.
Minister, will there be an opportunity for stakeholders and civil society to comment on the draft report?
Oh yes, we can't make a mistake. If we do any bill, we will. After what has happened in terms of the strategic plan, which says you must involve civil society, stakeholders, etc., we won't make such a mistake. Definitely not.
Thank you, Minister. My final question to you arises in the context of your constitutional obligations and your position as Minister of Health. And the question is this: is there anything that you believe you could have done to avoid this terrible tragedy?
Yes, as I said, if had I known that something like this is being planned, first of all, I said it would have been discussed in the National Health Council, where all the MECs are, the Surgeon General of the Military Health Services, SALGA, and all the HODs, and all the DDGs at the National Department. All of them put together, they will have known whether something like this could happen or not. And I believe it would have been stopped. But unfortunately, the matter did not even come there. I don't understand why such a big issue could not have come there. And the people who were involved in this know better, because justice, when we launched the biggest HIV counseling and testing campaign, I still remember that very well. We had a whole week retreat in Mpumalanga where we're outlining, when you do such a big thing, what do you do? And I still remember MEC Mahlangu then, because she came twice to the department. She was the MEC from 2009 and in that 2010. I still remember, because she's not a health person, asking very deep questions. And I remember what she asked. What is the side effects? Because we're talking about possible side effects of medicines. What is pharmacovigilance? And we said all these things must be discussed thoroughly, because we are coming with a huge project. And I want to believe this should have happened also.
Yes, indeed. But the question is a little closer home, Minister. The question is there anything, as a matter of hindsight, that you could have done to help prevent the disaster?
Oh, yes. If I knew that was going to be such a disaster, justice, I would have done a lot. I've already told you, one could resort to courts of law. I could have spoken to the Premier and say something like this is supposed to happen. We have got powers over the MEC, which I would have gone to lots of authorities to make sure that something like this doesn't happen.
It's another way of asking, is there an omission that you are able to identify now that would make you say, damn, if I knew then, or damn, I would have acted differently?
Well, maybe after Section 27 wrote to the department and the DG was dealing with this matter, because I thought the DG is well capable of dealing with it, maybe. But this is with hindsight. One should have said, hey, can I sit with the DG and ask him if you like help from me? And maybe something might have emerged. But because I thought she's competent enough, and also because the agreement between Section 27, I don't think there's any human being, even Section 27 itself, which will have guessed that Gauteng Department of Health would renege, because they completely reneged on what they did and signed. And obviously, with hindsight, I would have advised the DG, please, even if even if they say they are not refusing, they are agreeing, let this be an order of court. But unfortunately, that I didn't do.
You see, Minister, the evidence is there were marches, television programs, press statements, agitation in a wide variety of ways, and all of those escaped you certainly, or your office, until September the 14th. So the natural question, and that's where council is going, is why was it so silent in the National Department of Health? Why didn't you hear anything?
Well, Chief Justice, that's a very fair question. And I'm also asking myself. But this type of things about problems with communities, etc., they happen a lot with provinces. And when they believe they are unable to solve those, they come to me. And I was under the impression that all these altercations will be solved at the provincial level. There's an MEC there, there's a premier. If they want my help, they'll certainly come, like Limpopo did in Eastern Cape at some stage. So I will say yes. With hindsight, unfortunately, after horror has happened, one then thinks back and say, oh, maybe one should just have stormed in to ask, even when not being asked.
Yeah, in all fairness to you also, it was not your direct competence. You started with concurrent powers or competences, so it was a layer, at least one layer removed from you, maybe two layers, maybe three. Very well. Any more questions?
Thank you, Justice. Other than to thank the Minister again, that's it from Section 27.
Yes. Thank you. Advocate Krause.
Thank you, Justice Moseneke. Minister, my name is Lila Krause, and I appear with my learned friend, Mr. Skibi, on behalf of the survivors of this group. My learned friend for the state has said that you're here to apologize for the deaths of the mental health care users. But in fact, these proceedings goes much further than only the deaths. It's also about the suffering. So I just want to put that on record, and I'm hoping that you will agree with me that it's not only about deaths.
Indeed, I'm aware of that.
Yes,
because it appears like that in the UMBAT's recommendation number 17, which also established this ADR mechanism.
Minister, I'm not going to be very long. I'm going to be very brief with you, but there are some issues that I want to just deal with.
It's called death by exhaustion, Council. At some point, you tire them and they keep quiet, right? Even advocates do, ultimately.
Justice, I'll try to do my duty despite the exhaustion.
Yeah.
Minister, if I could take you to LR 91, please. It's an exhibit that was handed in.
Can you collect it? It's falling apart.
It's Exhibit 91. It's LR 91. Justice, might I ask that this light has just been in my
right
eyes?
In your face?
Yes, and
Yes.
I can't read.
They want
Thank
you on
you.
television, ma'am. That's the reason why.
Thank you.
It's, if you could just put it a little aslant, please, camera lady. Not right in the face of the advocate. Thank you.
Thank you, Justice. Minister, do you have a document with the handwritten LR 91? It says affidavit by Nompilo Nunkosi.
Yes, I have it.
If you could turn the pages to the last 3 pages, you will see this forwarded conversation.
3 pages?
Yes.
The third page is where they are
If you turn to the 4th page after the word affidavit.
Forwarded conversation.
Yes, do you see that?
Yes.
It says open letter to the minister. Do you see that?
Yes.
It's dated the 7th of June 2016, and it is to 2 officials, Hadebe F and Sutu M. Do you know those people?
Kadebe F. The Kadebe F I knew was my spokesperson, but who left long ago before that date.
And
Sito M is my PA.
Yes. This was an open letter to you. Did this ever come to your knowledge?
No.
As a result of this letter, wherein Ms. Nkosi complains about the human rights violations, this letter or your office must have referred to the Cullinan Care and Rehabilitation Center because they answered this letter. That's the last page. So basically what I just want from you, did it ever come to your attention?
No, unfortunately not.
And if it had come to your attention, would you have done something about that?
I'm not sure what is contained in this letter.
Yes, she basically says her brother's constitutional rights are being violated because of this Gauteng Marathon project.
Yes, I will have found out how they are being violated. Because as I told you, the Mental Health Act 2002 put a specific emphasis on human rights. It was the reason why it was established as against the 1973 Act. So I will definitely have like to inquire what human rights violations are there.
Is there any follow-up in your offices for complaints that come in as open letters to you?
Hey, I don't ever remember receiving open letters in my office, but the way my office works, immediately they receive correspondence. There is a lady who logs it in and answers and tells them that it has been received. And then it goes to my chief of staff or PA. And of course, they go through it. They might decide that this one, the mental health director can deal with it, or this one can deal with that. Because sometimes the correspondence is huge. But I have asked them that as much as possible, those things which they seem to be controversial, they must bring them to me first. I'm the one who will refer them. But it's very difficult to guide them which ones. But that's how the office works.
You see, Minister, we debated this with the Premier earlier, and you might be aware of the debate we had. Leaders must be responsive. And the Constitution requires leaders to be responsive. And you can't be responsive if the concerns of the community don't reach leaders, when it is important that leaders know about concerns. And one of the challenges in this arbitration process has been this. Many leaders did not hear the voices of those on the ground. An open letter like this, with other examples at MEC level, with other examples at Premier level, indeed where there are examples at Directorate level, where things get managed by more junior people, even in circumstances where you'd expect otherwise. Shouldn't there be a rethinking of governance and administration in a way that identifies critical things, and juniors don't kick sideways or downwards important things? We had evidence of this. It is quite heart-rending. And if you find time to read the letter, it was directed at you as an open letter from somebody who had a brother, moved from Waverley, ended up in Cullinan, and the consequences were quite painful. Shouldn't there be a rethink of how you identify things that must come to you? But only they come from citizens who are in pain.
Yeah, I agree with you, Justice. Indeed, it's quite unfortunate, but I would like to add that it does not necessarily mean that when my office refers these things to officials, then it's the end, it dies. Because quite a number of them are senior. It's Director of Mental Health, Chief Director. They will then read these things, and they know that their job is to advise me. And usually, after going through, they will then write a memo. I also must take this opportunity to correct something as I'm answering this question. Because I've heard that in government, nobody takes decisions. They are taken by something called the collective. Yes, and I was shocked to hear that, because that's not how the state works. When a decision is going to be taken, Justice, they'll write a sort of a submission, what you call a submission, to the minister. it has got a subject, and then a purpose, then a summary, and then follows strategic focus on the submission. In other words, the annual performance plan and strategic plan. Then there is a thorough discussion which gives all the facts and figures, etc. After that, you must state relevance to the national, I've skipped. You must mention relevance to many other factors like the financial implications, the human resource implications, the legal implications, the communication implications to the public. Then from there, there's recommendation. And it must be signed until the DG recommends. And on my part, it says approved, not approved, or amended. Then I sign. Once I sign and I say approve, I'm the one who legally has made that decision. And that's how usually government works. And that's how officials usually communicate with us. Because they advise you and say, Minister, under these conditions, we recommend you do ABC. And the DG will say, I'm recommending to the minister or not, or will say, Minister, this is what they've given to me for your approval. And I can say, no, I'm not approving. Or I'm saying I'm approving, or I'm saying I'm amending. So it doesn't necessarily mean that that form of communication means is a dead end. It's not.
Well, 3 senior people ducked. They took that route. It was a collective decision. It was a collective decision. Obviously, it may have been in consideration of other forms of culpability and liability. But of course, clearly, somebody must make the decision, surely.
Absolutely. Because any official, I don't see any official in government implementing any decision without this document I've mentioned about. Because otherwise, government will become an extraordinary useless animal, because how do I know decisions that were made before my time? Yes, if there is something that is happening in the department, I need to go back and say, let me see how the decision was made. And I ask for a memo like this to see what was the subject, what was the purpose to the minister, what were the discussions, what were the considerations, did the minister approve, and why? All those must happen. So it is absolutely not true to say in government a decision is taken by a collective, and this, we don't know who that collective is. Because otherwise it's a flat structure. There is hierarchy in government. And I've just informed you, one of the things that happened is a concept called executing authority. And I'm sure the meaning of the word executing is very clear and very serious.
Yes. Councillor.
Thank you, Minister. I'm still going to interrogate you a little bit on that a little while later, but I'm thankful that you're putting that in perspective, because some of the government official has definitely not told us the truth on that aspect. Could I just ask, is there any initiative to blacklist NGO managers or workers that has been involved in this project where people have died? And could that be a national project or initiative?
You know, Justice, one of the things that is not mentioned here is the issue of licensing, which in the previous act was the minister. The minister could license, NGOs could withdraw the license. That power was taken, as I said, devolved to the MEC in the province. Now, when I looked at what happened in Esidimeni when we read the Umba's report, something terrible happened. Before a minister or even MEC gives a license to an NGO, the people who must start first is the municipality in terms of bylaws. And if yes, because you are going to put people there and treat them, which means it's a mini hospital. And you can't just establish a hospital anywhere, in any township. I'm afraid to mention the name. Yes, in a township anywhere, you can't. The municipality will have, in terms of their bylaws, give permission, because where they are going to check is it allowed? I'm sure there's something called zoning. Yes, they are supposed to apply zoning regulations. By the time it comes to the department of whether you inspect, whether you can give a license or not, The municipality will have told you by zoning we agree. And it even mentioned in the zoning regulations, you must mention what purpose you want to use this facility for, how many people. They must even send experts to inspect this number of people can fit in here. In which case, if they've done, they will have seen that this is too small to fit so many people. That was not done.
Yes, Minister, no, that's very helpful. But what Council is asking is, are you going to blacklist NGOs where this devastation occurred?
I don't think we'll blacklist them. The police, SIU, and the police must investigate. If there must be criminal charge, they will. What we'll do is to apply the laws according to the plan, if they apply in future. I mentioned this in Parliament, and I want to mention it again, because somebody, a member of Parliament, said, Minister, your officials, the officials in the Department of Health in Gauteng have messed up, and you want to put the blame on NGOs. It's unfair. I said I still have to see an adult South African who is not in government, an adult South African who, whether they've got a correct license or not, can just take a buggy and go to a mental health institution and choose people, tie them and load them in that buggy and say, I'm going to take care of them. I said that doesn't need any education. Generally in our society, just morally, I don't see any adult doing that except if that adult has got a criminal mind. So I still want...
So we're not going to blacklist them. We
will say police must follow them. If they find them guilty, the law will take this course. On our side, we'll say from now onwards, no license is issued until we follow all the laws, including the bylaws of the municipality, including all the provisions of how to give a license. That will be some form of blackmail. But just to point and say, we don't, I'm not sure how just will be that.
So are you saying, thank you, Justice Motsoaledi. So are you saying that if one of the NGO owners wants to open a new NGO in Western Cape, they'll be allowed to do that, even though people have died under their watch?
I don't think they'll be allowed.
But why not?
Because all these things will come out during the time when you are giving them the license. You'll ask them about their previous history, their capacity, etc.
And that will be built into the licensing? Are you saying that that process will be built into the licensing?
Yes, I think so. When we discuss, and I'm inviting NGOs to recommend that when we develop the new norms and standards about licensing, that people who have done wrong in the past must show why that wrong happened, etc., etc. I'm not sure whether you call that blacklisting, Yes.
Thank you, Minister. Can I also ask you, do you know the reason why this marathon project has happened?
Council, I've been asking myself that question ever since this thing started, because there's a lot of criminality in this whole thing. And in any criminal activity, there's usually a motive. I looked left, right, and center what the motive could have been. I'm afraid it beats me up to today. And in Parliament, they even asked me, could the motive have been money? And I said, to subject so many people to what has been subject to until they die, it needs to be billions that you are chasing. So I'm puzzled. I honestly don't know. And that's why it's difficult for me. I thought maybe with the wisdom of Justice Motsoaledi, we may arrive there and say this was the motive. But for me, it beats me up to today, and I've been thinking about it for more than 18 months now since this thing happened. What could have been the motive that people do this? Because if you look, there was a clear intention to hide it, even from the National Ministry, from the National Health Council, from the Premier. For what motive? It absolutely beats me.
Minister, the reason I'm asking this question, I'm from the Eastern Cape, and at the same time, Life Esidimeni facilities was under siege, like in Gauteng, by the Department of Social Development. And frail care patients were also threatened to be placed in non-licensed NGOs. Were you aware of that?
When I became aware, the MEC was saying frail care is not social development, is health. She wanted to send them over to health, because I still remember somewhere where they were talking about oxygen cylinders, etc.
Yes.
I immediately approached the Minister of Social Development and said, please stop this immediately. Maybe it's because now we were fully alert at that time after the tragedy of Life Esidimeni, which was a horror. So, so Eastern Cape couldn't continue. The other province that acted very well is the MEC for Social Development in Limpopo, MEC Joyce Mashamba, because she specifically invited me to come and address their cabinet, because they wanted to move people out of this Life Esidimeni. Coincidentally, the hospital where I talk about and say there were homeland politics called Chiluvan was the one which is where the Life Esidimeni. And I addressed the cabinet and I told them this is not advisable. I sent a team there, the mental health unit nationally, to go and inspect what they want to do and for what reason. That's why we're able to stop it. But the two provinces did not hide, unfortunately. I mean, fortunately. They didn't hide anything. They actually, especially Limpopo, said, Minister, can you help? Even if they know it's not my powers, they've got executing authority powers, they still look for advice.
Minister, just to correct, it was the court that interdicted the Eastern Cape situation. It wasn't coming from the officials. They were pushing for it until the court made the decision. But what you're telling us now is that there was also a drive against Life Esidimeni in Limpopo. So why was Life Esidimeni targeted in this way?
In Limpopo, it was a bit different, I must state. Because anyway, we don't understand the reason in Gauteng. But in Limpopo, it was not government which was targeting Life Esidimeni. It was workers. It was unions. Because the unions, remember when you contract Life Esidimeni, it employs its own workers. So the workers there discovered that state employees earn more than them. And so they wanted to become state employees. And they thought the only way to become state employees is to close Life Esidimeni. And so they mobilized the community to say the level of care there is very poor, is down, and the people need to be moved and be taken over by the state and all that. So it was a prayer of workers who wanted more benefits than their employer was giving them. So it was not the state.
Yes,
and
Minister,
it's quite unfortunate that in Gauteng they are targeted by the government, in Limpopo they are targeted by workers, unfortunately, but that has since been stopped.
it seems to me that there was some orchestrated effort to close Life Esidimeni in South Africa. Would you agree with that?
I'm not sure about that. It sounds like a conspiracy theory, unless I don't see where the conspiracy came from. I'm not sure. Because these are isolated incidents and there's no relationship.
No, there is a relationship, because it's all Life Esidimeni with respect, Minister. But let us move on to my last point.
It's possible,
Yes.
but I can't see that relationship. Maybe you are seeing it.
Minister, I want to go back to Justice Moseneke's question to you about hearing the voices of the people. And I want to speak to you specifically about court cases. And what we have a court case here where the department has put untruths before the court, and the court didn't protect health.
The department has put
Untruths. They lied in the
which
court.
department?
Your department,
You mean the provincial
yes,
department?
Yes.
The provincial department?
Yes.
Yes, not my department, the provincial one.
You've explained that to us, Minister. I
Okay.
take your point.
Fine.
My question to you is, we have Section 27's court case saying you're not adhering to our agreement. And in that court case, lies are told, and the court comes to the wrong decision. Then we have a court case that's lying in front of you. It's a thick document. It's Siabedinga, elderly and disabled, versus the MEC of Gauteng. And in that affidavit, or in that document, again, the department is not truthful with the court. And they take technical points. And again, the mental health care users are not protected. Now, my question to you is this. and I'm going to interrupt myself just a little bit. I do a lot of work against the government, and it's virtually
No, you must
impossible.
explain. You mean litigation against the government?
Yes.
Okay.
I do a lot of litigation. It's virtually impossible to get personal service on a minister. And you are not a lawyer, and accept that, but without personal service, you can't hold the minister accountable for the orders that you get. Now, my question to you is, how are we going to get government to be responsive through the executive to court cases, firstly? And then if you could also say, how are we going to allow human rights violations to come to the attention of the executive? If you could answer those two questions.
Counsel, can you explain to me, because yes, I'm a little bit confused there. What do you mean by saving the minister?
When you, in terms of the State Liability Act, the minister is always a party to a government if you sue the government.
Yes, for anything.
For most of the things. Now, when you sue the government, you have to give those court papers via the sheriff to the minister's office. You also go to the state attorney, but more often you also go to the minister. Even though the state attorney would be involved, they don't represent the minister, because the minister don't even know about cases against them. And I want to know, how do we change that?
Well, I found the question quite confusing, though, Counsel. Isn't it so that State Liability Act provides and permits service of a minister on state attorneys?
Yes, the rules are being changed in that aspect, Justice. They are now dual, or very soon it will be dual service. But the problem lies there in, if I can just, I will also give you half of my fee, Justice, to formulate my questions. But what happens, you get an order against the minister, but you can't execute on it because there wasn't personal service on the minister, and that happens all the time.
I haven't had that ever. I hear the point, and there may have been change in the law. If there's due service at an office which the law identifies as place, if you like, a domicilium citandi et executandi, defined by law, like a State Liability Act, then, or the State Attorneys Act, then the problem might go away. I don't know how this minister helps us about issues of service.
Yes, no, what I'm putting to the minister is, how can the executive be made aware of court cases so that junior officials are not dealing with issues, especially of human rights?
Yeah, that's a legitimate inquiry. It has been clear in the evidence that there will be service of important claims against even political principles. We have examples here of the MEC, one of the premier, and indeed, possibly in your department, where the principals themselves never know that court processes or papers were served. And therefore, even if you were to confront them, they say, I didn't know, I didn't give instructions to defend, it must have been my staff. So Counsel says, how do we make sure that, particularly in human rights breaches, principals come to know of crucial cases against their departments?
Yes, indeed, Justice. It used to be like that, whereby some cases even get lost in court, and we hear that there's an appeal, and you knew nothing about it. Now, the present process in the department is that even if I don't know, this memo I've mentioned, the legal unit has been instructed that once they receive any litigation, because anybody who's litigated in any part of the country, as long as they work in health, even if a driver knocks another, driving a government car knocks another car, and they want 1,000 rand, the minister is cited. So what the team does is to write this memo and give me an advice and say, Minister, in this case, don't defend, or we're asking them, we're writing them to remove you because you are not supposed to be party, decided you wrongly, or they ask you that we are going on to defend, we'll tell the state law advisors to defend. And I approve, as I've mentioned here, because
So-
they will have mentioned all the facts.
Minister, are you saying that all cases come to your attention then?
Well, not all cases, most, I will say, because some of them still don't come. But I'm just saying we have set up a new process. Remember, this also is some form of culture. So we are trying to change that culture. So I will say most cases is better than it used to be in the beginning, right? I've been in health for 9 years now. It's better than 9 years ago. Yes. But still not all cases. Some of them you still miss.
Minister, I hope that this practice in your department will flow over to other national ministers as well. Thank you, Justice. That is all that I have.
And it's a big accountability issue. I mean, council has got her finger on it. It's loss could happen below principles, political principles, and below executing authorities. As we have seen here, there's a claim against the department, including the MEC, in relation to Takalani. The officials deposed to affidavits which turned out to be blatant lies. And a court grants an order in favor of the department. The MEC comes here, she's never heard a word of it. But her name is there, and notice to oppose is filed in her name. Lo and behold, people are taken to Takalani. On the last count, Advocate Steyn, there were 38 died. So if there was a proactive executing authority aware that there's a court case and takes care, would interrogate it, and it may well have been that Takalani would never have received mental health care users. They were the first. And their mental health care users died in large numbers, 38 bodies. And there's an outbreak there of typhoid in Takalani. So you can see that's where the council was coming from, to say there's something here. People litigate, violation of human rights, executing authorities never hear of it, but they are cited in court. That's the point that was being made to you.
Yeah, no, it's quite painful. It's justice. And I believe under such conditions, whoever did that must be charged. And I believe Ministerial Ramokgopa is going to do that, because we said apart from the people cited by the UMBAT, I personally believe there are lots of people in the Gauteng Department of Health who must be charged in one or the other.
Okay.
Yes, I really, and I'm not saying it to spite anybody, because I've never seen such dubious characters working for government. I'm saying so because even after the UMBAT ruled that we must de-establish the Gauteng mental health marathon project, we had lots of problems. I remember the family committees came and said so-and-so is not cooperating. So-and-so, we had to remove some of them in that process. That means even after the disaster, they didn't seem to be appreciating. They were still continuing the way they were doing. And we agreed with them. I remember I told the people that this department needs to be overhauled completely.
You know, Takalani was paid over 13 million over 10 months, and the payments went way beyond the time when you had started the multidisciplinary project to shut it down.
That's why
somebody continued paying them right up to near, I think, April 2017.
I think the SIU must come in, because how do we know that the payment was deliberate and there's a kickback? How do we know? We can't prove that, and we can't just leave the matter. I will ask the MEC that, and the DG of the province, that this matter need to be pursued. We need to understand who continued paying beyond what they're supposed to be paying. I hope also the Auditor General might be able to pick it up.
You see, Precious Angel, which is your favorite example, Minister. And one of the first to be shut down was paid continuously right through to March 2017, if my memory serves me well. Then, presumably, there were no patients anywhere near, but the Department of Finance continued paying them. So yes, we have quite a culture there that is amazing,
Because
to say the least.
Precious Angels was the first one to be closed by the Ministerial Advisory Committee, and that was on the weekend of 16, 17, 18 September. It will then be amazing what they were being paid for in March. That's why I'm saying the SIU must come in there and investigate. Who paid for what reason? There might have been some kickbacks involved there.
Advocate Dina. Thank you, Advocate Krause. Thank you.
Good evening, Minister. I am Nonhlanhla Yina, one of the evidence leaders. I just want to find out, did you get to know the names of the people who were involved in the conception and the implementation of the project?
Yes, the Umbats mentioned them in the report and even mentions what must happen to them.
Did you personally get to sit down with them just to find out what was the reason behind the project?
No.
Earlier on, you indicated that this issue is one of the issues that ought to have been tabled and discussed at the National Health Council. Is that so?
Yes.
Am I correct that you chair that council?
Yes.
And that the MEC and the HOD also sit in that council?
Absolutely.
Did you not see it necessary to find out from them why they overlooked that council?
No, because I regarded this as a crime scene. Yes. Yes, I've already reported the matter to the Umbat. He is going to clearly, because now if I start interfering with them and asking them questions, I'm not sure, I just thought it's inappropriate. But I thought after the Umbats are finished, we'll then revisit the issue and find out politically why this was not done. So at the present moment, I didn't do so because, as I'm saying, the Umbats was investigating. He came with recommendations, some of whom are being charged. They have to appear in DC. And I said, because it's an HR issue and a labor issue, it falls within the scope of the province, not mine. Then the recommendation 17 is about ADR. And all those processes, I wanted them to come to an end. There's another process here which was not mentioned, that people can appeal and say, no, the Umbats found me guilty, but I don't agree. And in terms of Section 81 of the Act, they can appeal within 30 days, and I must set a tribunal, which must be chaired by a retired judge. And I appointed retired Judge Bennett Ngwepe to chair that. Together with two health professionals, I appointed Professor Jerry Kovadia and Professor Robertson. And so I couldn't interfere in all those and start asking my own questions because there were processes set in motion.
Now that they have resigned, will it still be possible for you to deal with it politically?
Well, after they've resigned, obviously, they no longer work for the state. They've got no reason to listen to me in any way. All I can do is to deal with those who are left in government.
Thank you, Justice.
Because the others is police. It doesn't mean if you resign from government, it's over. It doesn't. Police must still go. One of the recommendations of the Umbat, and we're waiting for processes to finalize, was that the two officials who are professionals must be reported to the Health Professions Council and the Nursing Council, because they are professionals, whether they work for Gauteng or not. So the Nursing Council is still going to call Dr. Manamela, because we are going to go to them and say professional ethics here, and the Health and Professions Council will still call Dr. Siluba. So it's not over. All I'm saying is at my level as the politician, I can't call them because I call them as what?
But what about the MEC?
I will call her as what, because she's no longer the MEC, she has resigned. If I talk with her individually, because, yes, she has resigned, the people who can deal with her are the Hawks and the police and the SIU or whatever legal authority and the courts, not me.
Thank you, Justice. That will be all.
Nkosi, Advocate Tina. Advocate Groenewald.
Thank you, Justice. Minister, my name's Dirk Groenewald and I represent 4 of the family members.
Dirk?
Groenewald.
Oh.
Yes. Minister, we'd just like to thank you for appearing at these proceedings. Other for that, we don't have any questions. Thank you, Justice.
Thank you.
That's progressive. Very progressive.
Re-examination, counsel.
Thank you, Minister. Similarly to Advocate Groenewald, we'll have no questions in re-examination.
Minister, we're very close to the end. We're almost at the end. Before you make your final statement, and I don't want to speak after that, I just would like to thank you for coming here. I would like to, on behalf of certainly many South Africans and the family, to thank you for having been active in the remedial end of this disaster. And you were part of a contrite state. You know, governments often are arrogant, but you chose a different route to show contrition, to show remorse, and engage the families to arrange this arbitration process. I might remind you, it's going to come at a cost. And I think you're one of the parties, so you're one of those whose department is going to pay, the claimants. But we'd like to thank you for helping us get to that place. And on the evidence, it appears that you took many steps to arrest what otherwise would have been even a bigger disaster. So I thought I'll spend the time, and particularly to those who don't understand the process, how it came into being, and role of state. The other cases where the state has never and did not accept liability, here the state did. Even that too has helped these proceedings and has brought us closer to closure, certainly for the families. So I thought it's appropriate to acknowledge that publicly, and that you have been part of the arbitration process. And it might set an example for our nation going to the future. Those are the words I wanted to say publicly in thanking you for your role, including coming to ask me whether I would serve and chair this arbitration and this ADR process. It is now your turn to say whatever, Minister, before we close.
Thank you, Justice. I'm very humbled by your words. And we chose you specifically because we had all the confidence in you. Because the recommendation 17 by the Umbad said we must look for a credible South African who will conduct this process. And I must take this opportunity on behalf of government, as well as civil society, and the relatives who suffered, and the legal teams that represent them, to thank you heartily that once more you have shown your credibility and the confidence we have put in you, because the whole country is satisfied about the way you conducted this process. So, so Chief Justice, when we come to ask you again, on my part, I regard... On my part, Chief Justice, I regard the life Esidimeni issue as constituting one of the most painful and horrible events in the history of post-apartheid South Africa. On the day the Umbad released his report, I was asked by the media if I'm not embarrassed by this. And I said, this goes beyond embarrassment. I'm not embarrassed, I'm horrified. and very angry because I feel people have been betrayed. But I also felt personally betrayed as the Minister of Health, who is presiding over this department. So for that reason, I said, embarrassment doesn't really come to define the feeling I'm having, because this has tarnished the health system of the country in a way unimaginable. And it has placed us in a very difficult position, nationally and internationally. Because wherever you go internationally, they ask you about this issue of life is demanding. And because they don't know the South African legal system, they believe the minister was directly responsible, have got all powers, because many countries don't know our provincial system, especially that we keep on telling people we are a unitary state. But in most of these functions, we are very federal, I'm afraid. And it's one of the things that we want to correct when we review the laws. So as the Minister of Health, I wish to apologize unconditionally to both the families and relatives of the deceased, and those who are still living, and to the whole nation at large. We have really wronged them in a way unimaginable. I know that the emotional and psychological trauma that the families and relatives of the deceased, as well as living patients, have endured is extremely unbearable and even impossible to quantify. When I read the UMBA's report about how people were bundled in vans and tied with sheets, and how they were chosen, like, as he described it, like cattle at an auction. I mean, I couldn't just imagine in our new democracy and in a department where we put up an act and put in as the objectives, one of the objectives, human rights. And human rights come and be breached in this manner, in a way that is reminiscent of our apartheid era, not the democracy. It's very painful. That's why I feel, personally betrayed that colleagues who were working with could do something like that. So my appearance today in this gathering was in terms of the recommendation and to try and shed some light. And I'm disappointed once more that I'm unable, after 18 months, to shed some light as to what was the motive of this. Why should human beings plan to do something like this, advertently or inadvertently? It's very painful. I don't know whether the families will find it in their hearts to forgive us for what has happened, because it should not happen to any human being, not even your worst enemy. And I'm very sorry for that. Thank you.
Minister. And I think we should allow you to leave. You need not in a hurry. There's a bit of housekeeping we're going to do very briefly. But I would like to take some time to thank, this being the last day of evidence, to thank the families. This has been remarkable. To have a full house hearing must suggest a very deep, not only pain, but commitment to see open justice. And I know I have fought with you a good few times when you heckled, "Unamanga." Uyaxoka. And heckling witnesses and battling to keep you calm, and yet you remain focused, and we've shared a lot of pain together and had a lot of stories together. So I just would like to thank you. And every morning waking up to be here, I know how early you wake up to make 9 o'clock here. Very, very early, coming for a variety of residences. I'd like to thank you for that. And we all hope that this will accrue to something beneficial to all of us, and all the council and all the hard work. The teams behind council, we often have this confusion about who does the hardest work. Is it the advocates or the attorneys who do the digging and the research and the hard work? But I really would like to thank you. It was trying from time to time, but you have been here. And as I said, Mr. Skivi is my witness that this is plain water with a bit of fruit in it. So we've had a very good time. And last time I spent time also to thank the media. It's not often you find 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 cameras in one venue. But this has managed to convey this process, Minister, to the whole nation, as you know. And they've done it with amazing assiduity and dedication to bring out this story to so many. Some have even fallen down here, some of these camera ladies, and survived the fall. So I really would like to thank all of you for coming out, and all of those experts who came to testify pro amico, pro bono rather. And I really would like to thank you. And the camera people, a bit of a nuisance as they click away, but they're a necessary nuisance, I want to suggest. And it's my way of thanking you. But lastly, the provincial staff, they rolled out resources. I'd like to thank the province for this, HOD, and the whole province for rolling out all the facilities. It would not have been possible to have a credible arbitration process without the resources of the province. And that is a very amazing example of caring for people in deep distress and in pain. We've come to the end, therefore, of the evidence. Council, know that you owe me some evidence, documentary evidence, and I would like to have it before argument. Is there still any difficulty about that, Advocate Hassan?
Justice, no difficulty with that. All our evidence is in.
Yeah. Save for the certification of people who have passed on, who are not yet on our lists.
The affidavits on behalf of their families are part of the evidence, and all of the relevant information pertaining to the deceased.
Yes.
Thank you, Justice. Justice, I have 4 affidavits that I would like to hand in now, if I may. It's LO 165. It's Tabiso Ramokgopa. LO 166. It's the same name, but it's a different person. So it's 2 people with the same name, but it's in respect of 2 different family members. LO 167, Elizabeth Malgas, and LO 168, Mordecai Motsoaledi Mhampo. If I could hand those in, and there are some affidavits outstanding, but we will make sure that they are placed before you, before argument.
And they are marked sequentially as required.
Yes, Justice.
And your colleagues will get copies of those.
Yes, Justice.
Very well, thank you. Advocate Dina, or Advocate Guchana. Advocate Dina.
We do not have any documents that we intend to submit, Justice. All the documents are on record.
Yes.
Thank you.
Advocate Groenewald.
Thank you, Justice. Justice, we would like to submit actuarial report, LR 164. It supports and corroborates the report submitted by Section 27, with the exception that it's more specific to our clients and family members that we represent. It has been provided to all my colleagues.
Thank you. Let's give it an LR number and hand that up.
LR 164.
LR 164.
Indeed, so, Justice.
Thank you, Counsel.
Thank you, Justice.
Anything else from your end?
That'll be all, Justice.
I
would like to put in a motion that perhaps if we appear next week, if we can use that canvas there at the back for the families to sign their names, so that it can bear testimony for generations to come of their participation in this process. I do not intend to argue that this should be the monument, but I think it would be quite a good gesture of showing their involvement.
Well, you're keeping up to your rock star image with the families. And I'm sure they would love that. They would love that, Advocate Groenewald, and thank you ever so much. Advocate Utamo.
Thank you, Justice. Before we deal with the documents which we have got to make available, my learned friend has just mentioned LR 164, which is the actual report. He has not made it clear if there's going to be any evidence which is going to be led in respect of this actual report. We don't quite understand its value in the absence of the expert testifying on it. Apart from that, there are documents which MEC Chrissy has indicated that will be made available. We will try and find out how soon can we make them available before argument is being led. And on the issue relating to the verification, we'll also act upon it and be able to endeavor to report at the appropriate time. Thank you.
An appropriate time would be the morning of the first hearing on legal argument.
We will do our best to see if we are able to achieve that, Justice.
Yes, very well. Well, I think we have I think we've done our bit, and all the evidence has been led. Just for the public record, we're going to meet again on the 8th and the 9th of February to hear legal argument, and after which there would be a process of deliberation by the arbitrator, who within the time specified in the arbitration agreement will hopefully bring out an award, which really would be the outcome of all of these proceedings, which would be made available to you, of course, and the public at large. So that is really what remains. Final hearing, 8th and 9th, deliberations, and an award. Beyond that, we've come to the end of these proceedings. Father, you're on your feet.
Son of a living God. We've come to the end of the long road that we have been traveling. Thank you, Lord, because you have been our God, the God of our fathers, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the fathers of our family members, the father of us who are still alive. Thank you, God, for Ntate Kgang Moseneke. Thank you, Lord, for the counselors who have been on his side all the time. When we started this, when I prayed, I said that Kgang Moseneke has been chosen to be our Moses, to lead us through the wild desert of the life in this country. And the counselors have been appointed to be our Moses and our Miriam, who were assisting our judge to lead us like the children of Israel from Egypt. We have come to this point, God. It is not the end of everything. There are still many issues that has to be looked into. Thank you for all the people, the family members who have given evidence here. Thank you, God, for those members of the council who have been so patient to ask and dig out the truth from the people, from the government, who could not come up with the truth. We've been sitting here, Lord, for these days to listen to the lies that they've been telling us. We're like people who were not knowing what we have come here for. But God, we knew that our family members have died. We have buried them. And this is a sure assurance that God, at the end of time, they will rise in glory. Thank you, God, for all the family members who have been traveling miles and kilometers from their homes, waking up in the early hours of the morning. Travel with us, Lord, this evening when you go back home, to go and rest for a while and seek guidance from you. Bless Ntate Kgang Moseneke. Bless all those people who have been assisting him. Tate re a go leboga, re go lebogela le Ntate Motsoaledi, our Minister of Health, who have come up with the truth on some of the issues that we didn't understand. Thank you, God. Bless them and bless us, Lord. Into God's holy name, we commit you, Ntate Kgang Moseneke. Bless our counselors. Bless all the men and women who have traveled all the time and been here. Keep us safe, Lord, that at the end of the day, we'll see and say, glory to you, God. Glory to you, Lord. In the name of Jesus, we say, thank you, God. Amen.
I'll move forward.
Sorry. There's transport outside, and for everyone, there's a snack at the entrance, at the main entrance of the venue. There'll be some snack and tea. Yes, thank you. Judge is still present.
Hey, my brother. Get that.
Last photo, my darling. Where's my friend? He's gone. 8 and 9.
8 and 9.
But he's a legalist.
What about the legal
Thank you.
Didi?